The tide did not come in, and everything depended on it. Out on a coral reef barely visible from the air, an island the size of a city neighborhood waited behind concrete, steel, and interlocking fields of fire. Tarawa was never meant to be held for long. It was meant to bleed anyone who tried to take it, quickly, publicly, and without mercy. For the United States, Tarawa was the test, not of courage, that was assumed, but of doctrine, of amphibious warfare, of whether the Pacific War could be pushed forward at all. The invasion of Betio Island was planned with confidence. Naval gunfire would smash defenses. Landing craft would ride the tide over the reef. Marines would move inland and secure the island within days. The calculations were precise. The ocean did not care. When the first waves approached, the tide stalled lower than expected. Landing craft grounded hundreds of yards from shore, trapped on jagged coral under direct fire. Men spilled into chest-deep water, burdened with gear, wading forward while machine guns raked the lagoon. Some never reached the beach. Others reached it only to discover there was nowhere to hide. The shoreline was a wall of fire. Concrete bunkers overlapped fields of fire with ruthless efficiency. Artillery was pre-sighted. Machine guns never stopped. Naval bombardment had not destroyed the defenses. It had only warned them. Japanese forces waited inside hardened positions, designed specifically for this moment, emerging to fire and then disappearing again behind steel doors and reinforced walls. What followed was chaos compressed into hours. Units mixed together. Officers fell. Orders dissolved into instinct. Marines advanced by inches, crawling, charging, dragging wounded men behind seawalls and wreckage that barely offered cover. Flamethrowers and grenades became the only way forward. Every bunker had to be taken at close range. Every yard of sand was contested. The heat was relentless. Water ran low. Bodies lay where they fell. The lagoon turned red behind the advancing waves. For 76 hours, the battle never truly paused. Night brought infiltration and sudden attacks. Daylight brought renewed fire from positions still not fully reduced. Reinforcements arrived directly into the same killing ground. By the time Tarawa was secured, the shock was immediate and profound. The island had fallen, but at a cost that stunned the American public. Images of the dead on the beaches spread quickly. The reality of the Pacific War was no longer distant or abstract. It was visible, undeniable, and horrifyingly close. Tarawa changed everything. It exposed the limits of naval bombardment. It forced changes in landing craft, tactics, and coordination. It reshaped how every future island assault would be planned. The battle was short, but its lessons were permanent. Tarawa matters not because it was large, but because it was honest. It showed what modern amphibious war truly demanded. It showed how quickly plans collapse when nature intervenes. It showed the cost of learning under fire. Tonight, we return to that reef and that beach, to the stalled tide and the burning sand, to the place where the Pacific War revealed its true price, to Tarawa. Before we continue, let me pause for a moment and hear from you. Where in the world are you tuning in from right now? And what time is it for you there? Is this a late-night listen, an early morning start, or a quiet moment carved out just for history? And if these long, steady journeys into the past help you slow down, reflect, or stay present with stories that deserve time and respect, I hope you'll consider subscribing. Every subscription helps keep this calm, in-depth style of storytelling alive. If this feels like a place you'd like to return to, then stay with me. Settle in. This is the history of the Battle of Tarawa, November 1943, Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Admiral Chester Nimitz stands alone in a strategy room on the second floor of the submarine base headquarters, staring at a map of the Central Pacific that stretches 12 feet across the wall. His finger traces a line from Hawaii southwest across thousands of miles of empty blue ocean, stopping at a speck so small it barely registers on the chart. Tarawa Atoll, 2 miles long, 800 yards wide at its widest point. Smaller than New York's Central Park. Most Americans have never heard of it. Most never will. But in the next 76 hours, it will become the bloodiest piece of real estate, acre for acre, that American forces have ever tried to take. Nimitz circles the island again with his finger, knowing what he's about to order, knowing what it will cost. The decision to assault Tarawa wasn't born from its strategic value, but from a darker calculus. By late 1943, American war planners faced a fundamental problem that kept them awake at night. Nobody knew if the United States could crack Japan's island fortress strategy. The Japanese had transformed dozens of tiny coral atolls across the Pacific into concrete fortresses, each one a potential killing ground for American forces. Guadalcanal had been won, but that was jungle fighting, attrition over months. The Central Pacific drive toward Tokyo required something no one had ever done successfully: amphibious assaults against fortified islands, where defenders had every advantage and attackers would wade ashore into interlocking fields of machine gun fire. Could it be done? Would the casualties be sustainable? Tarawa would answer those questions. It would be an experiment, a test case. A laboratory of amphibious warfare where the lessons would be written in the blood of 19-year-old Marines. Tarawa Atoll sits in the Gilbert Islands, almost 2,500 miles southwest of Hawaii, barely north of the equator. The atoll is shaped like a triangle, with Betio Island forming the southwestern corner, the most heavily defended 300 acres of coral in the Pacific. In September 1943, reconnaissance aircraft from carriers begin photographing Betio flying low and slow over the island at dawn when shadows reveal details. The photographs they bring back shock intelligence officers. Every square yard of Betio appears to be fortified. They count more than 500 defensive positions, massive concrete blockhouses with walls 5 feet thick. Artillery positions surrounded by coconut log revetments. Machine gun nests every 50 yards along the beach. An 8-inch coastal defense gun that can sink ships at 12,000 yards. The island looks less like a military installation and more like a medieval fortress transported to the 20th century, updated with steel and concrete and surrounded not by a moat, but by a coral reef that might prove even more deadly. The photographs reveal something else that sends a chill through the planning staff. The reef. Tarawa Atoll is surrounded by a barrier reef that extends 500 to 800 yards offshore, depending on the tide. At high tide, there's enough water over the reef for landing craft to pass. At low tide, the reef becomes a barrier that no conventional landing craft can cross. The Higgins boats that carried Marines ashore at Guadalcanal draw 3 to 4 feet of water. If the tide is wrong, those boats will ground on the reef, and men will have to wade 700 yards to shore carrying 70 pounds of equipment, while Japanese machine guns fire at them from concrete bunkers. The intelligence officers measure the reef in the photographs, calculating angles, estimating depths. They send the photos to Navy hydrographers who study Pacific tide tables. The reports come back contradictory. Some say there will be 4 feet of water over the reef on the planned assault date. Some say 3 feet. One ignored report from a British colonial officer who lived on Tarawa says the Niap tide in November can leave as little as 18 inches of water over the reef for days at a time. Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner, commanding the amphibious force, reviews the intelligence with his staff. The reef problem dominates every planning session. The Navy has a potential solution, the LVT, landing vehicle tracked, called the Alligator by Marines who've trained with them. These amphibious tractors can crawl over the reef, carrying 18 men or 2 tons of cargo. They're slow, mechanically unreliable, and offer zero armor protection, but they float and they can cross the reef. The problem is numbers. The entire Marine Corps has only 125 LVTs available for the assault. First wave, second wave, third wave, that's it. After that, every subsequent wave will ride in Higgins boats that might ground on the reef, turning Marines into targets in a shooting gallery 700 yards long. Turner's staff calculates the odds. They build plans assuming the tide predictions are correct. They don't build alternative plans for what happens if the tide predictions are wrong. November 10th, 1943. The assault plan is finalized at a conference aboard the USS Pennsylvania in Pearl Harbor. D-Day will be November 20th. H hour will be 0830. 3 assault battalions will land simultaneously on 3 beach zones, designated Red 1, Red 2, and Red 3. stretching along Betio's northern shore. Major General Julian Smith, commanding the 2nd Marine Division, voices concern about the reef and the tide. Admiral Hill, commanding the naval forces, reassures him that Navy battleships will blast the island for hours before the landing. "Gentlemen," Hill says, with the confidence of a man who has never waded ashore under machine gun fire, "we will not neutralize Betio, we will obliterate it. There will be nothing left alive." In the back of the room, Colonel David Shoup, who will lead the assault troops, says nothing. He has studied the photographs. He has read the reports about Japanese fortifications. He knows what coconut logs and concrete can withstand. He suspects the Navy's confidence is misplaced. The strategic purpose of Tarawa is explained to the assault troops in simple terms. It's a stepping stone to the Marshall Islands, which are themselves stepping stones to the Marianas, which are stepping stones to the Philippines, which are the final stepping stones to Japan. Each island brings American bombers closer to Tokyo. Each atoll seized denies the Japanese another airbase. But there's an unspoken purpose that only the senior planners acknowledge among themselves. Tarawa will teach the Americans how to assault fortified islands. It will reveal what works and what doesn't. It will expose the flaws in equipment, tactics, and planning. It will be expensive, they know. Very expensive. But the lessons learned at Tarawa will theoretically save lives in the 50 or 60 island assaults that lie ahead on the road to Tokyo. This is the cold mathematics of war in the Pacific. Sacrifice some to save more. Accept casualties today to reduce casualties tomorrow. Write the doctrine in blood at Tarawa so it can be followed at Kwajalein, Saipan, Iwo Jima. On Betio Island, 2,500 miles away, a Japanese officer named Rear Admiral Keiji Shibazaki walks the beach fortifications with a satisfaction that borders on pride. He has commanded the defenders of Tarawa since August 1943, and he has transformed this coral speck into what he believes is an impregnable fortress. He has told his garrison, nearly 5,000 men, that 1,000,000 Americans cannot take Tarawa in 100 years. He believes this. The Americans, he knows, have never successfully assaulted a heavily fortified atoll. They will learn at Tarawa that such assaults are impossible. They will learn the cost of challenging the Japanese Empire. They will leave their dead floating in the lagoon and retreat to their carriers, bloodied and beaten. Shibazaki has studied Gallipoli in World War I, where the British and Anzacs suffered 50% casualties trying to land on fortified beaches. He has built Tarawa to be worse than Gallipoli, much worse. November 15th, 1943. The invasion fleet departs from bases in New Zealand, Samoa, and Hawaii. 18,000 Marines of the 2nd Marine Division board transports, not knowing their destination. Not knowing they're sailing toward an island, most of them won't live to see secured. They clean rifles, sharpen knives, write letters home. Aboard the USS Xylin, a 19-year-old private from Iowa writes to his mother, "We're going somewhere important. The officers say this landing will change everything. I hope I make you proud." The letter will be found in his pack after his body is recovered from the Reef. In the troopship's wardrooms, officers study sand tables showing Betio's layout, memorizing the positions of bunkers and gun emplacements. They practice radio procedures, review fire support plans, coordinate timing down to the minute. Everything depends on timing. Everything depends on the tide being right. Everything depends on the bombardment destroying Japanese defenses. The officers project confidence to their men because that's what officers do. But alone in their bunks, some of them stare at the ceiling and wonder if the planners have underestimated what they're about to face. The fleet sails southwest toward Tarawa through heavy seas, spread across 30 miles of ocean, maintaining radio silence. Below decks, Marines gamble, tell stories, sleep fitfully in the sweltering heat. Above decks, lookouts scan for Japanese submarines. The naval escorts, battleships, cruisers, destroyers, carriers surround the vulnerable transports in protective screens. This is the largest amphibious assault force yet assembled in the Pacific, larger than Guadalcanal, larger than anything before it. It carries enough firepower to level a city. It carries enough men to overwhelm almost any defense. But as the fleet approaches Tarawa, as the tiny island appears on navigation charts and radar screens, No one aboard these ships fully understands what awaits them. Not the admirals in their flag quarters, not the colonels studying their maps, not the 19-year-olds writing letters to mothers they'll never see again. Tarawa is about to teach them lessons that no training could prepare them for. It's about to reveal truths about amphibious warfare that will reshape every landing that follows. The price of that education will be measured in young men who step off landing craft into chest-deep water and never reach the shore. March 1943, Betio Island. The first concrete is poured at dawn, mixing dust and heat into a slurry that Korean laborers carry in buckets to wooden forms hastily built around bunker frames. The men work without speaking, shirtless in the equatorial sun, their backs scarred from overseers' punishments. They are building something unprecedented in the Pacific War, a fortress designed not just to resist American attack, but to annihilate it at the water's edge. Rear Admiral Keiji Shibazaki stands in the shade of a coconut palm, watching the construction, making notes in a leather journal. He has 8 months to transform Betio into an island that cannot be taken. He has 14,000 cubic yards of concrete, 500 Korean laborers, and nearly 5,000 Japanese troops. He also has a vision of defense so total, so interlocking, so merciless that American forces will break against it like waves against a seawall. Shibazaki is not a typical Japanese naval officer. He is 53 years old, a veteran of China, a student of defensive warfare who has studied every failed amphibious assault in modern history. He knows Gallipoli, he knows the Dardanelles, he knows that defenders with fortifications and overlapping fields of fire can slaughter attackers who must expose themselves, crossing open ground. Betio offers him the perfect canvas. The island is only 300 acres, so flat that there is nowhere for attackers to hide, so narrow that every square yard can be covered by interlocking fire from multiple positions. The reef provides a natural barrier that will force Americans to wade ashore under fire for hundreds of yards. Shibazaki's defensive philosophy is simple and brutal. Let them land, then destroy them before they can get off the beach. Build positions so strong that American naval bombardment will be ineffective. Create redundancy so that if one gun is destroyed, 3 others can cover the same sector. Make surrender impossible by designing positions where defenders can fight to the death without retreat. The construction proceeds through spring and summer of 1943 with industrial precision. Japanese engineers survey the island, marking positions for bunkers every 50 yards along the northern shore, where Americans are expected to land. Each bunker is unique, designed for its specific sector, but all follow the same brutal logic. Walls of reinforced concrete 5 feet thick at the base, tapered to 3 feet at the top. Roofs of concrete slabs covered with 3 feet of sand, then coconut logs, then more sand. Firing slits designed to be nearly invisible from the sea but offering wide fields of fire across the beach. The bunkers are interconnected by trenches, so defenders can move between positions without exposing themselves. Each strong point can support the others. Each position is designed to keep fighting even if surrounded. The engineers build them to withstand 2,000-pound bombs. They will need to. The laborers work 12-hour shifts in conditions that kill dozens from exhaustion and tropical disease. Korean conscripts drag coconut logs, stack sandbags, pour concrete until their hands bleed. Japanese soldiers oversee the work with rifles and clubs, driving the pace, accepting no excuses. The largest structure takes shape near the center of the island, Shibazaki's command bunker, a concrete fortress 20 feet underground, with walls 7 feet thick, and a roof that could stop anything short of a direct hit from a battleship's main guns. Inside, workers install communications equipment, plotting tables, electric lighting powered by a generator. From this bunker, Shibazaki will control the battle, directing fire from dozens of positions onto specific sectors of beach. He tests the telephone lines personally, calling each position, ensuring communication even under bombardment. He walks the trenches between bunkers, timing how long it takes to move reinforcements. He stands on the beach at dawn, watching the light, calculating fields of fire. The heaviest weapons arrive by barge in June and July. 8-inch Vickers guns, taken from the British battleship Prince of Wales, when it was sunk off Malaya in 1941. Shibazaki places them to command the approaches from the sea, positioning them to sink American transports before they can unload their troops. 40mm anti-aircraft guns that can depress to fire at landing craft. 7.7mm heavy machine guns in concrete positions with interlocking fire across every yard of beach. 13mm heavy machine guns for anti-boat work. Type 95 light tanks buried hull-deep as fortified gun positions. Shibazaki arranges them like instruments in an orchestra, each one covering a specific sector, all of them coordinated to create a symphony of destruction when American landing craft approach the reef. The defensive plan Shibazaki creates is elegant in its lethality. The first line of defense is the reef itself, which will ground American boats and force men to wade ashore. The second line is underwater obstacles, steel tetrahedrons and concrete pyramids placed at the reef's edge to tear out the bottoms of landing craft. The third line is mines and wire. Thousands of mines buried in the sand, double-apron barbed wire strung along the beach in belts 15 yards deep. The fourth line is the main defensive positions, 500 bunkers and pillboxes that can survive naval bombardment and pour fire onto the beaches. The fifth line is the reserve, Japanese troops in positions inland, ready to counterattack or reinforce sectors under pressure. Every yard of beach can be hit from at least 3 positions. There is no dead space, no cover, no safe approach. Shibazaki walks the defenses daily, finding gaps, adding guns, improving fields of fire. By October, he is satisfied. The Americans will die in the water, on the reef, on the beach. They will not reach the seawall. The Japanese garrison numbers nearly 5,000 men by November, a mix of naval troops and construction units now trained as infantry. Shibazaki drills them relentlessly in their positions, teaching them to shoot at specific range markers on the reef, training them to hold fire until Americans are too committed to retreat. He explains his philosophy to his officers in the command bunker. We will destroy the enemy at the water's edge. Do not waste ammunition on distant targets. Wait until they are in the killing zone, then destroy them completely. The officers nod. They have watched the fortress grow around them. They have tested the bunkers against demolition charges and found them solid. They have calculated how many Americans would have to wade across 700 yards of reef under fire to reach the shore. The mathematics favor the defenders overwhelmingly. Shibazaki makes a final inspection in mid-November, walking from the western tip of Betio to the eastern tail, checking every position. He stops at a machine gun bunker on Red Beach 2, the central sector where he expects the main American assault. The gunner demonstrates his field of fire, sweeping the barrel across markers placed at 100, 200, 300 yards. At 300 yards, the reef begins. At 100 yards, the seawall provides the last cover before the bunkers. Shibazaki calculates, a man wading through chest-deep water, carrying equipment, will move perhaps 1 yard per second. 700 seconds to cross the reef. Nearly 12 minutes under fire. No landing force can sustain that. He tells the gunner, aim low, shoot them in the legs first. They will drown trying to stay up. The ones behind will have to climb over the bodies. The gunner nods. He understands. The final defensive positions are completed by November 15th. Shibazaki sends his last report to the regional command in Truk. Tarawa is ready. The fortress will not fall. The Americans will learn that some islands cannot be taken. He believes this absolutely. He has built something unprecedented in the Pacific, a coral fortress where every advantage belongs to the defenders. He has created a defensive system with no weak points, no gaps in coverage, no way for attackers to flank or bypass. Every approach leads through the killing ground. Every landing zone is covered by multiple guns. The bunkers will survive the bombardment. He is certain of this. The Americans will come with thousands of men and hundreds of ships, but they will break against Betio like waves against coral. Shibazaki writes in his personal journal that night, if the enemy comes, we will show them the true cost of challenging Nippon. Not one defender will surrender. Not one position will be abandoned. We will bury them in the lagoon. What Shibazaki cannot know, what no intelligence has told him, is that the Americans are not coming simply to take Tarawa. They are coming to learn. This battle will be their education, their laboratory, their bloody seminar in amphibious warfare. The fortress he has built so carefully, the defensive system he has perfected, will teach the Americans lessons they will apply to 50 more islands between here and Tokyo. Tarawa will be the price of that education. But in November 1943, as Shibazaki makes his final inspections, as Korean laborers put finishing touches on the last bunkers, as Japanese gunners zero their weapons on reef markers, none of them know they are building not just a fortress, but a school, a terrible school where the tuition is paid in lives, where every lesson is written in blood, where graduation comes only after 76 hours of close-quarters slaughter that will shock both nations and change the course of the Pacific War. July 1943, New Zealand. A Marine corporal stands knee-deep in muddy water, cursing at a metal vehicle that looks like a bathtub with tank treads. The LVT-1 Alligator sits motionless in the training pond, engine sputtering, refusing to move despite the corporal's increasingly creative profanity. This is the vehicle that's supposed to save lives at Tarawa. This is the innovation that will crawl over the reef when Higgins' boats ground out. This is the mechanical solution to a tactical problem that's kept planners awake for months. It's 26 feet of riveted steel, powered by a Continental radial engine that overheats in tropical humidity, steered by clutches so stiff they require 2 men to operate, and about as reliable as a promise from a used car salesman. The corporal finally gets it moving by kicking the transmission housing, a maintenance technique not found in any manual but widely practiced. The LVT lurches forward, climbs out of the pond, then dies again on the far bank. Watching from shore, Colonel David Shoup makes notes in his field book. These vehicles will carry the first 3 assault waves at Tarawa. Everything depends on them working. He is not reassured. The LVT was never designed for combat. It was created in the 1930s by a boat designer named Donald Roebling as a rescue vehicle for hurricane victims in the Florida Everglades. The military saw potential and bought a few dozen, modifying them for amphibious assault by removing most of the armor to keep them lightweight and adding bench seats for troops. By mid-1943, they remain experimental, temperamental, and in desperately short supply. The Marine Corps has exactly 125 available for the Tarawa assault. Each can carry 18 combat-loaded Marines, or about 2 tons of cargo. Simple math reveals the problem. 5,000 Marines in the first 3 assault waves, 125 LVTs, equals 3 trips minimum. And that assumes every LVT completes every trip without mechanical failure, without being destroyed by Japanese fire, without sinking in heavy seas. It assumes perfection in a vehicle that breaks down in training ponds. The reef problem dominates every planning session. Intelligence photos show the barrier reef extending 500 to 800 yards from shore, depending on location. At high tide, there should be enough water over the reef for the Higgins boats, the standard LCVP landing craft, to cross. At low tide, those boats will ground on coral that can rip out their bottoms. The Higgins boat is a brilliant piece of marine engineering, Andrew Higgins' gift to amphibious warfare, but it draws 3 to 4 feet of water. If the tide is wrong, if the depth over the reef is less than 4 feet, those boats become stationary targets and Marines become infantry wading through chest-deep water for 700 yards while machine guns fire at them. The LVTs, theoretically, solve this. They float until they hit the reef, then their treads grab coral and they crawl over it, delivering Marines directly to the beach. In theory, in calm water. When they work. The tide predictions become an obsession. Navy hydrographers study charts going back decades, measuring tidal patterns at Tarawa Atoll. The Gilbert Islands sit near the equator, where tides are complex, affected by the moon, sun, and Pacific currents in ways that don't follow simple patterns. The assault is scheduled for November 20th, during a neap tide cycle when tidal range is at its minimum. Some predictions say there will be 4 feet of water over the reef. Some say 3 feet. A few outliers suggest 2 feet or less. In Auckland, a former British colonial officer named Henry Fawcett, who lived on Tarawa for years, tells anyone who will listen that November and neap tides can leave as little as 18 inches of water over the reef for extended periods. The intelligence officers thank him politely and file his warning with other unconfirmed reports from non-military sources. They have sophisticated tide tables prepared by Navy experts. They trust the science over the anecdotes. Colonel Shoup trusts neither the science nor the anecdotes. He has led amphibious training exercises. He has seen too many plans collapse under the friction of reality. In planning conferences aboard ships in Wellington Harbor, he raises the reef problem repeatedly. What if the tide is wrong? What if the LVTs break down? What if we ground the Higgins boat 700 yards out? Major General Holland Smith, commanding the 5th Amphibious Corps, waves away the concerns. The Navy will blast a channel through the reef, Smith says, with the confidence of a man who has never personally crossed a reef under fire. The bombardment will be so intense, nothing will survive to shoot at your men. Stop worrying about the reef, Shoup. Worry about getting off the beach fast enough to make room for follow-on waves. Shoup says nothing more in the meeting, but in his personal notes that night he writes, "If the boats hang up on the reef, we're going to wade in. Better prepare the men for that." The loading plan gets finalized in October, first wave. Companies on LVTs hit Red 1, Red 2, and Red 3 simultaneously at 0830 hours. Second wave, LVTs return to Reef, pick up next increment of troops, deliver them ashore. Third wave, same process. Then the plan shifts to Higgins boats for waves 4 through 12, carrying the bulk of the assault force. The timing assumes LVTs make round trips in 20 minutes, from reef to shore to reef. The timing assumes Higgins boats can cross the reef. The timing assumes everything works perfectly on a timetable created by staff officers who have never driven an LVT or navigated a reef under combat conditions. Shoup reviews the plan and adds a contingency that isn't officially in the orders. He tells his company commanders to prepare for a wade of up to 700 yards if boats ground on the reef. Some of the officers look at him like he's being overcautious. A few who have studied the intelligence photos look at him like he's just confirmed their worst suspicions. Training intensifies in the final months before the assault. Marines practice loading and unloading from LVTs in heavy seas. They rehearse beach assaults on New Zealand atolls with similar reef structures. They drill radio procedures, fire support coordination, casualty evacuation from vehicles. The LVTs break down constantly. Engines overheat, transmissions seize, tracks throw. Maintenance crews work around the clock, keeping them operational. By November, fewer than 100 LVTs are fully functional. Shoup requests replacements from higher command. He's told no more are available. He requests a delay in the assault until spring tides guarantee deeper water over the reef. He's told the strategic timetable doesn't allow delays. He requests more reconnaissance of the reef to confirm water depths. He's told the intelligence is sufficient. At a final planning conference, Shoup makes one last attempt to raise the tide issue. An admiral cuts him off. "Colonel, your job is to execute the plan, not question it. The Navy has calculated the tides. There will be sufficient water." Shoup sits down. Later, he tells his executive officer, "Make sure every man knows how to ditch his pack underwater. Some of them are going to need to." The final equipment inspection happens in early November aboard transports. Each Marine carries 70 to 80 pounds. M1 rifle, 200 rounds ammunition, 4 grenades, entrenching tool, gas mask, canteen, rations, first aid kit, combat pack. Some carry more. Flamethrower teams with 60-pound tanks, bazooka teams with rockets, demolition teams with satchel charges and Bangalore torpedoes. Shoup watches them load, calculating how long a man can stay afloat in ocean water wearing this much gear. Not long. He orders company commanders to emphasize water survival in final training. He tells them to identify strong swimmers in each platoon who can help weaker swimmers if they have to wade. He suggests leaving some equipment in LVTs for later retrieval rather than losing it in the lagoon. Some commanders follow this advice. Some don't, believing the official assurances that boats will cross the reef without difficulty. The LVT crews are mostly young Marines with minimal training on the vehicles. Many have fewer than 10 hours of actual driving time. They've practiced approaching beaches in calm water, but never under fire. Never in conditions where Japanese gunners will target the slow-moving, unarmored tractors from fortified positions. The LVT has no protection for its crew or passengers. Bullets and shell fragments pass through the thin aluminum hull like paper. A direct hit from a 40mm anti-boat gun will disable it instantly. The crews know this. They've been briefed on Japanese defenses. They know they'll be priority targets. But they're 19 and 20 years old, and 19-year-olds believe they're immortal until circumstances prove otherwise. They practice loading and unloading until they can do it in darkness, until they can do it while seasick, until they can do it automatically. What they can't practice is doing it while Japanese machine guns fire at them from concrete bunkers 50 yards away. November 15th, 1943. The invasion fleet departs New Zealand. The LVTs are loaded onto LSTs, landing ship tank, that will carry them to Tarawa and launch them into the lagoon. Final mechanical checks reveal that 18 LVTs have mechanical problems serious enough to potentially fail during the assault. Maintenance crews work through the night, replacing parts, jury-rigging solutions, doing everything possible to get 125 functional vehicles to the objective. They succeed in getting 125 LVTs that run. Whether they'll keep running under combat conditions is another question entirely. Shoop inspects them personally before departure, climbing into each one, checking radios, examining tracks. He knows these vehicles are the difference between landing on the beach and dying in the lagoon. He knows the entire assault plan depends on them working. He knows they are the single most important piece of equipment in the invasion, and he knows, though he doesn't say it aloud, that they're probably not up to the task ahead. But they're what he has, and in war, you go with what you have, and you adapt when it isn't enough. November 20th, 1943, 05:45 hours. 15,000 yards offshore from Betio Island. The battleship USS Maryland's main battery elevates, 14-inch guns rising like the fingers of a giant pointing at the darkness. Fire control radars have locked onto coordinates plotted hours ago by intelligence officers studying reconnaissance photographs. Inside the ship's fire direction center, dozens of sailors work plotting tables and mechanical calculators, translating target coordinates into firing solutions. The ship's captain gives the order. The forward turret erupts. 9 14-inch shells, each weighing 1,400 pounds, leave the barrels at 2,300 feet per second, with a sound like the earth splitting. The shells arc 3 miles through the pre-dawn darkness, falling toward an island invisible in the gloom. They impact with flashes that light the horizon orange. From Maryland's bridge, officers watch through binoculars. They cannot yet see Betio, but they can see the explosions. They smile. This is going to work. This is going to obliterate the Japanese defenses. In 40 minutes, nothing will be alive on that island. The bombardment plan calls for 2.5 hours of sustained naval gunfire, followed by aerial bombing, all designed to neutralize Japanese positions before Marines land. The fleet assigned to this task is formidable. Battleships, Maryland, Colorado, and Tennessee, each with 12 14-inch guns, heavy cruisers with 8-inch batteries, light cruisers with 6-inch guns, destroyers with 5-inch dual-purpose weapons. Together, they carry enough firepower to level a city. The fire plan targets every known Japanese position on Betio: coastal defense guns, bunkers, command posts, supply areas. Intelligence officers have marked 500 targets on firing charts. The Navy will hit every one. When the guns lift, Marine commanders have been assured the island will be a moonscape of craters where nothing larger than a cockroach could survive. It will be the most concentrated naval bombardment in the Pacific War to date. It will also be almost completely ineffective. Inside Shibazaki's command bunker, deep underground near the center of Betio, the first shells hit at 05:47 hours. The bunker shudders. Concrete dust falls from the ceiling. Electric lights flicker but stay on. Shibazaki stands at the plotting table, tracking reports from his positions via field telephone. The American bombardment is beginning, as expected, as prepared for. He orders all personnel into hardened positions, all guns protected until the bombardment lifts. The bunker shakes again as a 14-inch shell lands nearby. The walls hold, the roof holds, everything holds. Shibazaki allows himself a small smile. The Americans are wasting ammunition on sand and concrete. His fortress will survive this. The real battle will begin when their Marines reach the Reef. The bombardment intensifies as the sun rises. From Maryland, Colorado, and Tennessee, shells rain onto Betio at a rate of dozens per minute. The island disappears beneath smoke and dust. Observers aboard ships watch through binoculars and report spectacular explosions. At 0607, a battleship shell hits a Japanese ammunition dump. The explosion lifts debris 500 feet in the air and creates a fireball visible from ships 10 miles away. Officers aboard the command ship congratulate each other. The fortifications are being destroyed. The Japanese are being annihilated. At 0615, carrier aircraft from the escort carriers add to the devastation, dropping 96 tons of bombs in coordinated strikes. The island is now completely obscured by smoke rising thousands of feet. Pilots report direct hits on every target. They return to their carriers, satisfied they've completed their mission. What the observers aboard ships cannot see, what the pilots cannot know, is what's happening inside Shibazaki's fortress. The bunkers, built to survive exactly this bombardment, are doing their job. 14-inch shells penetrate 3 to 6 feet of sand before exploding, creating spectacular craters but not reaching the concrete structures buried below. When shells hit concrete directly, they explode on impact against walls designed to absorb the shock. The massive bunkers near the beach, with their 5-foot-thick walls and coconut log roofs covered in sand, withstand direct hits with minor damage. Telephone lines are cut, then reconnected by runners. Some lighter positions are destroyed. Machine gun nests not properly reinforced, trenches that collapse. But the main defensive network, the 500 fortified positions that form the skeleton of Shibazaki's defense, emerge largely intact. In bunker after bunker, Japanese soldiers crouch against the shaking walls, waiting for the bombardment to lift, preparing to return to their weapons. The bombardment plan suffers from a fundamental constraint: time. Admiral Hill, commanding the naval forces, has allocated only 2.5 hours for the bombardment. His ships carry limited ammunition that must be conserved for future operations. His schedule demands that Marines land at 0830 to allow maximum daylight for consolidating the beachhead. When fire control officers request more time to ensure targets are destroyed, Hill refuses. The schedule is fixed. At 0900 hours, the bombardment will lift and Marines will land. That decision, that time constraint, dooms the assault to begin against defenses that are bruised but functional. The Navy fires 3,000 tons of shells at Betio in 2.5 hours. It's an impressive number. It's also insufficient to destroy fortifications specifically designed to survive exactly this weight of fire. At 0855, 5 minutes before the scheduled landing, the naval guns lift their fire inland. The sudden silence is jarring after the continuous thunder. Smoke drifts across Betio, obscuring visibility. Aboard Maryland, Admiral Hill receives reports from spotters. Target area saturated, heavy damage observed, no defensive fire detected. He nods with satisfaction. The bombardment has done its work. He orders the landing to proceed. On Betio, in hundreds of bunkers and pillboxes, Japanese soldiers emerge from shelter. They brush concrete dust from their uniforms. They clear debris from firing slits. They return to their machine guns, their anti-boat guns, their coastal defense artillery. They zero their weapons on range markers placed on the reef and on the beach. They are bruised, some are wounded, perhaps 50 are dead from the bombardment. But the defensive network is intact, the fortress stands. And in 10 minutes, American landing craft will enter their fields of fire. The fundamental failure of the bombardment stems from a misunderstanding of what naval gunfire can accomplish against prepared fortifications. 14-inch shells are devastating against ships, buildings, troop concentrations in the open. They are less effective against reinforced concrete buried under sand and coconut logs. The shells explode on or near the surface, creating craters, destroying light structures, shredding anything exposed. But the bunkers remain. Post-battle analysis will show that not a single major Japanese bunker was permanently destroyed by the bombardment. Some received direct hits that knocked them offline temporarily. Some had firing slits partially blocked by debris, but within minutes of the bombardment ending, 90% of Japanese defensive positions were operational again. The bombardment killed fewer than 50 Japanese soldiers. It damaged some positions. It temporarily suppressed some guns. But it did not neutralize the defenses. It did not create the safe landing the Marines had been promised. The artillery spotters aboard the observation planes circling Betio send their final reports as the bombardment lifts. Target area completely obscured by smoke and dust, unable to assess damage, no observed defensive fire. This last statement is true but misleading. There is no defensive fire because there are no targets yet. The Japanese are waiting, conserving ammunition, allowing the landing craft to commit themselves to the approach before revealing their positions. It's a doctrine Shibazaki drilled into his gunners. Do not fire until Americans are in the killing zone. Let them come close. Let them believe they are safe, then destroy them. At 0900 hours, as the first wave of LVTs crosses the line of departure and begins its run toward the reef, Japanese observers in command bunkers track their progress through binoculars. They calculate range and bearing. They pass coordinates to gun positions via field telephone and runner. And they wait. The Americans are coming. The fortress is ready. The bombardment that was supposed to obliterate Betio has instead become an expensive fireworks display that killed a handful of defenders and left the killing ground intact. In the LVTs approaching the reef, Marines hear the naval gunfire lift and feel relief. The island ahead is hidden in smoke, but they've been told nothing could survive that bombardment. They check weapons, adjust equipment, prepare to land on a beach swept clean of resistance. They have no idea that in bunkers, 50 yards from where they will land, Japanese machine gunners are at this moment loading fresh belts of ammunition, traversing their weapons across pre-sighted lanes, preparing to pour fire into the slow-moving, unarmored LVTs the moment they come within effective range. The thunder has been tremendous. The lightning, when it comes, will belong to the defenders. November 20th, 1943, 0400 hours. Aboard the USS Xylan, 8 miles off Betio. The ship's mess decks are serving breakfast, but the meal is nothing like standard Navy chow. Steaks, 3 inches thick, cooked rare. Fresh eggs, 4 per man. Toast with real butter. Coffee, strong and black. The cooks have prepared the traditional pre-assault breakfast. The meal men eat before they storm a beach. The meal that might be their last. 19-year-old Marines sit at long tables, working knives across meat, making jokes to cover fear. A corporal from Chicago says the steak is better than anything he ate growing up. A private from Texas says it's too rare, needs another minute on the grill. They laugh, they eat. They don't talk about what comes next. In 4 hours, they'll be landing on an island most of them can't pronounce. In 4 hours, many of them will be dead. But right now, there's steak and eggs, and if you're 19 years old and about to go to war, sometimes that's enough to hold on to. The wake-up call came at 0300. Marines rolled from their racks in the troop compartments, dressed in the dark, gathered weapons and equipment. The compartments are sweltering, despite ventilation fans working overtime. The ship sits near the equator, and the temperature below decks hovers near 90 degrees even at night. Men sweat through their dungarees before they even begin loading. Platoon sergeants move through the compartments with flashlights, checking that each man has his gear: rifle, ammunition, grenades, entrenching tool, gas mask, canteen, combat pack, rations. The load for each Marine weighs 70 to 80 pounds. Some carry more. Flamethrower operators hoist 60-pound tanks onto their backs. Demolition teams stuff satchel charges and Bangalore torpedoes into packs. Radio operators carry 25-pound TBX radios in addition to their personal weapons. They help each other with straps and buckles, adjusting weight distribution, preparing for the climb down cargo nets into landing craft. Robert Sherrod, a correspondent for Time and Life magazines, moves through the troop compartments with a notebook. He's embedded with the 3rd Battalion, 2nd Marines, assigned to land on Red Beach 1. He interviews Marines as they prepare, asking about hometowns, families, what they'll do after the war. A private first class from Iowa says he's going to marry his girlfriend and buy a farm. A corporal from Massachusetts says he's going back to college on the GI Bill, going to study engineering. They speak in future tense, planning lives beyond this day, because the alternative is unthinkable. Sherrod writes it all down. He's covered combat before, North Africa and Sicily, but he's never participated in an amphibious assault. The Marines tell him it's simple. Climb down the nets, get in the LVT, ride to the beach, get off, take cover. They make it sound routine. Sherrod suspects it won't be. At 0500 hours, the announcement comes over the ship's public address system. Now, hear this. All assault troops report to debarkation stations. The Marines stand, shoulder their packs, grab their rifles. They move through narrow passageways to the main deck, where cargo nets hang over the side. Below, LVTs and Higgins boats circle in the darkness, engines rumbling, waiting to take on their human cargo. The first wave will board LVTs. The second and third waves will board more LVTs. After that, it's Higgins boats for everyone else. The Marines of the first wave climb over the rail and start down the nets. It's a 30-foot climb down a swaying net while wearing 70 pounds of gear, descending in darkness towards small boats rising and falling in 4-foot swells. Men slip, catch themselves, keep climbing. When they reach the bottom, they time their drop, waiting for the LVT to rise on a swell before letting go and dropping into the vehicle. The LVTs are cramped and miserable. Designed to carry 18 men, they're packed with 20 to ensure enough troops reach the beach, even if some vehicles are lost. Marines sit on metal bench seats bolted to the sides, knees touching, rifles held vertical to save space. The vehicles stink of diesel fuel and bilge water and vomit from men who got seasick during the approach voyage. The engines are loud, making conversation impossible except by shouting. The LVTs have no overhead cover, leaving the troops exposed to spray and rain. As the vehicles circle in the assembly area, waves splash over the sides, soaking everyone. A corporal tries to light a cigarette, gives up after the third match gets wet. They circle for 90 minutes, waiting for all the LVTs to load, waiting for the bombardment to finish, waiting for H hour. Private First Class Gene. Seng, 18 years old from Ohio, sits in an LVT with Company E, 2nd Battalion, 2nd Marines. He's been a Marine for 14 months, trained at Paris Island and Camp Pendleton, shipped to New Zealand in July. This is his first combat. The man next to him is a sergeant from Oklahoma who fought on Guadalcanal, a veteran who knows what combat sounds like, what it smells like, what it does to men. Seng asks him what it's going to be like. The sergeant looks at him for a long moment, then says, "Keep your head down. Do what your squad leader tells you. Don't bunch up. If you get hit, get to cover before you check the wound. And if you see someone go down, you can't stop to help until you've secured the objective. You stop in the middle of a firefight, you just make another casualty." Seng nods, memorizing this. The sergeant adds, "It's going to be loud and confusing, and it's going to happen fast. Just remember your training and keep moving forward." At 0730, the LVTs form into waves, organizing by boat teams and battalions. Each wave forms a line perpendicular to the beach, boats spaced 50 yards apart. The first wave will hit Red 1, Red 2, and Red 3 simultaneously. The Navy has painted each LVT with colored markings to designate which beach it's assigned to. Red stripes for Red 1, blue for Red 2, green for Red 3. The crews try to maintain formation, but the 4-foot swells make it difficult. LVTs wallow in the troughs between waves, engines laboring, treads churning water. Some vehicles fall behind, struggling with mechanical problems. Crews kick transmissions, adjust throttles, coax temperamental engines. Most keep running, a few quit entirely, and have to be towed back to the LSTs. The replacement vehicles join the formation late, disrupting the careful organization. Colonel Shoup rides in an LVT with his battalion staff, monitoring radio traffic, trying to maintain situational awareness. The radios work poorly. Saltwater has infiltrated connections, creating static and dead spots. He can hear fragments of conversations from the fire support control ship, pieces of bombing, reports from the carrier aircraft. But he cannot get a clear picture of the bombardment's effectiveness. The island ahead is completely obscured by smoke. He has no idea if the naval gunfire has destroyed Japanese defenses or merely rearranged the sand. He won't know until the first wave lands. The radio crackles with a message from the command ship. Bombardment lifting at 0855. Landing craft proceed to line of departure. Shoup acknowledges. 25 minutes to H hour. The Marines and the LVTs get their first look at Betio as the smoke begins to clear. From 3,000 yards out, the island looks like a dark line on the horizon, so low and flat it seems to be floating on the water rather than rising from it. Palm trees, bent and broken by the bombardment, stick up like broken fingers. The island is 2 miles long, end to end. And from this distance it looks impossibly small, a scrap of land that shouldn't matter to anyone. But it matters now. It matters enough that 3 battleships have been firing at it for 2 hours. It matters enough that 5,000 Marines are riding toward it in waves of landing craft. It matters because if they can't take this tiny island, if they can't crack the defenses on this coral speck, then the entire Central Pacific offensive grinds to a halt, and the war against Japan continues for years more. At 0825, 5 minutes before H hour, the LVTs cross the line of departure and begin their final run to the beach. The run from the line of departure to the reef is 3,000 yards, roughly 1.5 miles. At 4 miles per hour, the LVTs will cover that distance in about 20 minutes. Then they'll hit the reef and climb over it another 700 yards to the beach. Total time from line of departure to shore, approximately 30 minutes if everything goes perfectly. The Marines grip their rifles. They check ammunition one more time. They adjust helmet straps. Some pray silently. Some vomit over the side from seasickness and fear. Robert Sherrod, in an LVT heading for Red 2, watches a young Marine repeatedly press the magazine release on his rifle, checking that the magazine is seated, a nervous tick he probably doesn't even know he's doing. Sherrod writes in his notebook, "These are boys going to do a man's job. God help them." Then he puts the notebook away, because in a few minutes he'll need both hands to hold on. November 20th, 1943, 0910 hours. First wave LVTs are 400 yards from the reef when Japanese gunners open fire. The sound is distinctive. A rapid hammering that carries across the water, different from the heavy thunder of naval guns, sharper, more focused. Tracer rounds arc from bunkers along the beach, red streaks cutting through the morning air, converging on the slow-moving amphibious tractors. Machine gun bullets hit aluminum hulls with sounds like hammers hitting tin, punching through the unarmored sides, ricocheting inside the cramped troop compartments. Marines duck instinctively, pressing themselves below the gunnels, but there's nowhere to hide in an LVT. The vehicles are metal boxes with no overhead protection, no side armor, nothing to stop bullets except the bodies of the men inside. In LVT number 7, heading for Red Beach 2, a burst of machine gun fire kills 3 Marines instantly. Blood sprays across the men next to them. The survivors sit frozen for a moment, stunned, then realize the shore is still 700 yards away. The LVTs hit the reef at 0917. The treads grab coral, the vehicles lurch upward, tilting at crazy angles as they climb over the barrier. Some make it, some don't. LVT number 12 throws a track on the coral, spinning in circles, unable to advance or retreat. The crew abandons it, diving into the water, swimming back toward boats following behind. LVT number 23 takes a direct hit from a 40mm anti-boat gun. The shell penetrates the engine compartment and the vehicle explodes, fuel igniting, ammunition cooking off. The Marines inside have seconds to get out. Some jump into the water on fire. Some don't make it out at all. The surviving LVTs keep going, crawling over the reef, tracks churning, engines screaming, while Japanese gunners pour fire into them from bunkers that the bombardment was supposed to have destroyed. From his LVT, Colonel Shoup realizes 2 things simultaneously. The Japanese defenses are intact, and the tide is wrong. The tide is catastrophically wrong. The Navy hydrographers predicted 4 feet of water over the reef. There are 3 feet in some places, 2 feet in others, 18 inches in the worst spots. The 4th wave, approaching in Higgins boats, finds this out when their boats hit the reef and stop dead. The coxswains gun the engines, trying to force the boats over, but the Higgins boat draws 4 feet of water and the reef is solid coral. The boats aren't crossing. A Navy coxswain in boat number 47 radios back to the control ship. "We're grounded on the reef, can't get over." "What are my orders?" The answer comes back. "Proceed to beach as planned." The coxswain stares at his radio. The beach is 700 yards away. He lowers the ramp. Marines look at the water, look at the beach, realize what's about to happen. The platoon sergeant says, "Fix bayonets, keep your rifles above water, stay spread out, don't bunch up." Then he steps off the ramp into chest-deep water and starts wading toward shore. What follows is slaughter. Marines step off grounded Higgins boats into water 3 to 4 feet deep. They're carrying 70 pounds of equipment. The water creates resistance that slows every step to a shuffle. They're in the open with no cover for 700 yards. Japanese machine gunners have zeroed their weapons on the reef weeks ago, placing markers at 100-yard intervals, training to hit targets at every range. Now they traverse their guns across the reef and fire. 7.7mm machine guns firing 500 rounds per minute from concrete bunkers that survived the bombardment. Marines fall in the water, shot in the chest, in the head, in the legs. Some scream, some die silently. The water around the reef begins to turn pink, then red. Men trip over bodies and go under, drowning in 4 feet of water because they can't get back up with their equipment. Others ditch their packs, ditch everything except their rifles, trying to move faster, but faster in chest-deep water still isn't fast enough. Robert Sherrod's LVT makes it over the reef and approaches the beach. He's taking notes, trying to be a professional journalist, but what he's seeing defies description. LVTs burning on the reef. Marines floating face down in the lagoon. Wounded men trying to wade to shore while bleeding from multiple wounds. A corpsman swimming to help a wounded Marine gets shot and sinks. Sherrod writes in his notebook, "This is hell. There is no other word. We have waded into hell, and the gate is 700 yards wide." His LVT takes fire from 3 different positions. Bullets punch through the hull on both sides, passing through the space where his head was a second ago. The Marine next to him, a sergeant from Alabama, says conversationally, "Welcome to Tarawa, sir. It's every bit as nice as the officers promised." Then his head snaps back and he falls, a bullet through his throat. Sherrod tries to help him, but there's nothing to be done. The sergeant drowns in his own blood before the LVT reaches the beach. By 09:30, 20 minutes into the assault, the lagoon between the reef and shore is a killing ground. At least 200 Marines are dead or dying in the water. 50 LVTs are destroyed or disabled. The surviving LVTs that made it to shore are trying to go back for more troops, but many are damaged, leaking, barely functional. The Higgins boats keep grounding on the reef, keep dropping their ramps, keep disgorging Marines into the water. The casualties pile up. A platoon from Company K loses 20 men wading in, more than half its strength, before reaching the seawall. Company I loses its company commander and all 3 platoon leaders in the water. By the time survivors reach the beach, they have no leadership, no organization, just small groups of shocked, exhausted men looking for cover. The Japanese gunners work systematically, firing at clusters of men, targeting anyone who stops moving, aiming at Marines trying to help wounded. Fire discipline is excellent. The gunners don't panic, don't waste ammunition, just traverse their weapons and fire in short bursts. Shibazaki's training is showing results. His doctrine was to destroy attackers at the water's edge, and that's exactly what's happening. The fortress held through the bombardment. The guns are operational. The fields of fire are exactly as planned. Marines are dying in the water by the dozens, by the hundreds, exactly where Shibazaki said they would die. The only variable his planning didn't account for was the LVTs that made it across the reef. Those have delivered perhaps 1,500 Marines to the beach. The rest, the thousands in later waves, are wading through the killing ground. Major Henry Crow, commanding 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines, watches from an LVT circling offshore. He's supposed to land with the second wave, but his LVT threw a track and he's stuck watching the disaster unfold. He estimates 30% casualties before reaching shore, maybe higher. He tries to radio Colonel Shoup for orders, but the radio is dead, waterlogged from spray. He tries to wave down another LVT to get to the beach, but they're all heading back to the reef for more troops, or they're disabled and drifting. He's a battalion commander who can't command his battalion, watching his Marines die in the water, unable to do anything except witness. Later, he'll say that those 20 minutes circling offshore, watching Marines wade into machine gun fire, were the worst 20 minutes of his life. Worse than combat. Worse than being wounded. Just watching while men under your command die, and you can do nothing. On the reef, the waiting continues through mid-morning. Wave after wave of Higgins boats ground out. Wave after wave of Marines step into the water and start the 700-yard shuffle to shore. Some make it, many don't. The Marines learn to spread out, to not cluster together, to keep moving no matter what. They learn to help wounded by grabbing their collars and dragging them forward, not stopping, because if you stop, you're a stationary target. They learn to drop mortally wounded men because you can't save everyone, and trying to save one man gets 3 men killed. They learn to ignore the screaming, ignore the bodies, ignore everything except the seawall ahead, where there's cover. They learn these lessons in real time, purchasing each one with lives. By 1100 hours, the reef is littered with bodies and wrecked equipment, packs floating in the lagoon, rifles dropped by men who needed both hands to stay above water, helmets drifting in the current, LVTs burning, sending black smoke skyward, and Marines, hundreds of Marines, some floating face down, some hung up on coral, some sitting in shallow water, too wounded to move, waiting for help that may not come. The tide is starting to rise, which will help later waves, but for the men who landed in the first 3 hours, the tide was a death sentence. The difference between 3 feet of water and 4 feet of water is the difference between wading in chest deep and wading in waist deep. It's the difference between taking 12 minutes to cross the reef and taking 8 minutes. It's the difference between 30% casualties and 15% casualties. It's the difference between 700 dead and 300 dead. The Navy got the tide wrong. The Marines paid the price. November 20th, 1100 hours. Red Beach, 2. Colonel David Shoup stumbles onto the sand with blood running down his leg from shrapnel wounds sustained when his LVT took a direct hit 50 yards from shore. He ignores the wounds. There's too much happening, too much chaos, too many Marines pinned down to worry about a piece of Japanese steel lodged in his thigh. He looks left and right along the beach and realizes the situation is worse than he feared. Marines are huddled against a coconut log seawall that runs the length of the beach, 3 to 4 feet high, the only cover available. Beyond the seawall is open ground swept by fire from bunkers that the Navy swore were destroyed. The Marines can't advance. They can't retreat. They can only press themselves against the logs and wait while Japanese machine gunners fire over their heads and mortars drop shells that explode in the sand, sending shrapnel in every direction. This isn't a beachhead. It's a shooting gallery where the targets have nowhere to hide. Shoup needs to establish a command post, and he needs to do it now, before the attack collapses into 100 isolated fights. He spots a destroyed Japanese bunker, 15 yards inland from the seawall, a concrete structure with its roof partially caved in from a lucky hit during the bombardment. It's the only hardened position on Red 2 in American hands. He runs to it, followed by his radio operators and battalion staff. They dive through the entrance as machine gun fire kicks up sand around them. Inside, they find 3 dead Japanese soldiers and a working field telephone connected to other positions. Shoup cuts the line and sets up his radios. This bunker, 20 yards from the water's edge, with Japanese fire coming from 3 sides, becomes the command post for the entire assault. From here, Shoup will try to coordinate attacks, call for fire support, manage reserves, and keep this desperate beachhead from being pushed back into the sea. The seawall is both salvation and trap. It provides cover from direct fire, but only if you stay low. The wall is continuous along Red Beach. Coconut logs 4 to 6 inches in diameter, stacked horizontally and driven into the sand. Marines crouch behind it, compressed into the smallest space possible, while bullets crack overhead and mortars drop randomly. The beach is 15 to 30 yards deep from waterline to seawall, which means every Marine on the beach is within grenade range of Japanese bunkers. Some bunkers are close enough to throw grenades onto the beach without exposing themselves. The Marines throw grenades back. This exchange continues for hours, both sides lobbing explosives at each other, both sides taking casualties, neither side able to advance. Lieutenant William Dean Hawkins leads the scout sniper platoon, 40 specially trained Marines whose job is finding and destroying enemy positions. Hawkins is 29, old for a lieutenant, a tough Texan who joined the Marines before the war and worked his way up from private. He's already wounded, took shrapnel in the shoulder during the landing, but he's moving along the seawall, organizing attacks on bunkers. He identifies a large pillbox 50 yards from Shoop's CP that's firing along the length of the beach, enfilading any Marines who try to advance. Hawkins gathers a demolition team, 2 men with flamethrowers, 3 with satchel charges, 4 riflemen for security. They crawl forward over open sand, taking fire from multiple positions. 1 flamethrower operator is killed 20 yards from the bunker. Hawkins picks up the flamethrower and keeps moving. The assault on the bunker is brutal and simple. Hawkins crawls to within 10 yards, rises to one knee, and sprays flame through the bunker's firing slit. Screams come from inside. A Japanese soldier runs out, on fire. A Marine shoots him. Hawkins signals for the satchel charge team. They run forward, throw 3 20-pound charges through the bunker's entrance, then sprint back. The charges detonate with a concussion that knocks Marines down 20 yards away. The bunker collapses partially, roof sagging inward, silence from inside. The bunker is neutralized. Hawkins has been doing this for 3 hours, identifying positions, organizing attacks, personally leading assaults when his Marines hesitate. He'll keep doing it until a Japanese bullet finds him the next day. By noon, Shoop's beachhead on Red 2 extends maybe 50 yards inland and 200 yards along the beach. It's not progress, it's survival. He has perhaps 1,000 Marines on the beach, scattered in small groups, pinned down by fire from bunkers that cover every approach. He's lost communication with Red 1 on his left and Red 3 on his right. He doesn't know if those beaches are even held. His radios work intermittently, batteries dying, saltwater corrosion creating failures. He manages to send one message to the command ship offshore, receiving heavy fire all along beach, unable to advance, casualties heavy, situation in doubt. The message is logged at 12:30. When war correspondents later report it, they'll change situation in doubt to issue in doubt, creating one of the most famous quotes of the battle. But Shoop didn't say issue in doubt. He said situation, and there's a difference. The issue, whether Tarawa can be taken, isn't in doubt. The situation, whether Marines will survive the day, very much is. Navy corpsmen work miracles on the beach, treating wounded while exposed to fire, dragging casualties to the minimal shelter of the seawall. Pharmacist's mate. Second class. Stanley Bowen treats 30 Marines in the first 4 hours, working with supplies he carried ashore in a waterproof bag. He runs out of morphine by noon. He runs out of bandages by 1 p.m. He starts tearing strips from dungarees to make improvised dressings. A Japanese sniper shoots him through the hand while he's bandaging a Marine's leg wound. Bowen switches to his other hand and keeps working. When he finally runs out of all supplies, he swims back to the reef, retrieves a medical kit from a destroyed LVT, and swims back to shore. He'll treat 84 Marines before the day ends, saving lives that shouldn't have been savable given the conditions. The Marines trapped against the seawall begin individual initiatives when coordinated attacks prove impossible. A sergeant from Kansas sees a bunker firing at the beach from 30 yards away. He can't contact his platoon leader, probably dead, and can't wait for orders. He grabs 2 privates and a barman, explains his plan. The bar will suppress the firing slit while the other 3 circle around and toss grenades through the entrance. They execute. The bar gunner fires 2 full magazines, keeping the Japanese inside the bunker suppressed. The 3 Marines run around the side, throw 6 grenades through the entrance, and dive for cover. The grenades detonate. Silence. 1 bunker cleared. The sergeant doesn't report this to anyone because there's no one to report to. He just looks for the next bunker and repeats the process. By mid-afternoon, small groups of Marines have pushed 15 to 20 yards beyond the seawall in isolated spots. They're not advancing in coordinated lines. They're infiltrating, using shell craters for cover. crawling forward when Japanese fire slackens, freezing when it intensifies. Progress is measured in yards per hour, paid for in casualties, forgotten as soon as it's gained when Japanese counterfire forces a withdrawal. But it's progress. The beachhead is expanding inch by inch, bunker by bunker. The Marines are learning what works. Flamethrowers and demolitions, combined assault teams, using destroyed bunkers as cover to attack the next position. They're inventing tactics in real time, adapting to the reality of Tarawa, learning by doing because there's no other way to learn. Shoop sits in his CP bunker, monitoring radio traffic, trying to manage a battle he can barely see. Reports come in fragments. Red 1 under heavy fire, requesting naval gunfire on bunker complex grid 147. Red 3 pinned down, need ammunition and water at seawall. LVT destroyed at Reef, crew casualties, need replacement vehicle. He makes decisions with incomplete information, sending his reserve companies to reinforce weak points, calling for naval gunfire on Japanese strong points, coordinating supply runs from the reef to shore. He's bleeding from multiple shrapnel wounds now, though he doesn't realize it. His uniform is soaked with blood and seawater. His voice is hoarse from shouting over gunfire and explosions. He's been awake for 18 hours and will be awake for 18 more. This is command in combat, making life and death decisions while wounded, exhausted, with 10% of the information you need and no time to think. As the sun begins its descent toward the horizon, Shoop receives a report that terrifies him. Ammunition is running critically low on all 3 beaches. Marines are down to their last magazines. Machine gun crews are rationing bursts. Mortar teams have fired all their rounds. The resupply LVTs are taking casualties trying to cross the reef, and much of the ammunition they're carrying is underwater after being ditched by Marines who had to swim. Without ammunition, the Marines on the beach can't defend against a Japanese counterattack. In every doctrine, every intelligence report, every study of Japanese tactics says the counterattack will come tonight. A massive bonsai charge designed to push the Marines back into the sea. Shoop radios the control ship. Need immediate resupply of ammunition, all beaches. Critical shortage. If Japs counterattack tonight without resupply, we cannot hold. The Navy promises to get ammunition ashore. Shoop hopes they're not lying. November 20th, 1300 hours. 8 miles offshore, aboard the USS Maryland. Admiral Harry Hill stands on the bridge studying the horizon, where Betio sits invisible behind smoke and haze. He receives fragmentary reports from beach commanders via radio, but the reports conflict. Colonel Shoop says the situation is in doubt. Major Shodel on Red 1 says his battalion is combat ineffective and pinned down. Major Crow says he's finally gotten ashore on Red 2, but casualties are over 30%. Meanwhile, observation aircraft report Marines advancing inland, resistance lighter than expected. Hill doesn't know which reports to believe. He's commanding the largest amphibious assault in Pacific War history, from a ship 8 miles away, unable to see the battle, unable to verify any information personally. He's blind. And blind commanders make mistakes that get men killed. The communication breakdown stems from multiple failures layered on top of each other. Most infantry radios got waterlogged during the wade from reef to shore. The ones that still work have dying batteries and limited range. Messages from beach units reach the control ship intermittently, often garbled, always delayed. The Navy's fancy communication plan, drawn up in Pearl Harbor conference rooms, assumed radios would work, assumed clear lines of communication, assumed commanders could maintain real-time awareness. The plan didn't account for combat reality. Radios drowning, antennas shot off, radio operators killed, frequencies jammed with traffic. Hill makes decisions based on fragments of information, interpolating between contradictory reports, guessing at ground truth. Major General Julian Smith, commanding 2nd Marine Division, has better instincts than Hill. Smith fought in World War I, commanded Marines in Nicaragua and China, knows ground combat in ways Hill doesn't. Smith reads Shoop's situation in doubt message and understands immediately that the assault is failing. He knows Shoop. Shoop doesn't exaggerate. Shoop doesn't panic. If Shoup says the situation is in doubt, it means Marines are dying and the beachhead is collapsing. Smith argues for immediate commitment of the reserve battalions, 1st Battalion, 8th Marines, 1st Battalion, 2nd Marines, plus the 3rd Battalion, 8th Marines still aboard transports. Get them ashore now, while there's still a beachhead to reinforce. Hill disagrees. Naval Doctrine says, hold reserves until the situation clarifies. Don't commit reserves to a potential failure. The argument happens in Maryland's flag plot, a compartment filled with maps and plotting tables where decisions affecting thousands of lives get made by men who can't see what they're deciding. Smith, a 2-star general, argues with Hill, a 1-star admiral, over whether Marines drowning on Tarawa need help immediately or can wait until the situation clarifies. Smith's voice rises. Admiral, my Marines are being slaughtered. We need reinforcements now. Not when your staff decides the situation has clarified. By then, there may not be a beachhead to reinforce. Hill argues that committing reserves to a failing assault just creates more casualties. Smith argues that not committing reserves guarantees the assault fails. The argument continues for 20 minutes. While on Tarawa, Marines continue dying at the seawall. Smith wins by pulling rank and by appealing to the chain of command structure. He's the Marine ground commander. Hill commands naval forces. Smith argues that once Marines are ashore, tactical decisions belong to the Marine commander. It's a thin argument, but Hill accepts it, partly because Smith is senior, partly because Hill is beginning to suspect Smith might be right. At 1400 hours, Hill authorizes commitment of 1st Battalion, 8th Marines to Red Beach 2. Smith immediately orders the battalion to land. The battalion commander, Major Lawrence Hayes, receives his orders and begins loading his men into LVTs and Higgins boats. By 1500 hours, 1,000 fresh Marines are heading toward Red 2. They will arrive in time to prevent the beachhead from collapsing. Barely. But there's another problem, one that Hill and Smith don't yet fully understand. They have no idea what the actual casualty numbers are. Reports from the beach say heavy casualties and significant losses and 30% casualties estimated, but these are guesses from officers trying to count bodies while under fire. The actual numbers are worse, much worse. Navy medical teams aboard the hospital ships are receiving wounded faster than they can triage them. Casualties are being evacuated on returning LVTs, laid on the coral-studded floors of the vehicles, often re-wounded by fire during the trip back to the reef. The counting is chaotic. Some wounded are counted multiple times as they move between collection points. Some dead are never counted because they're still in the lagoon or buried under sand. By evening, when staff officers finally compile numbers, the totals shock everyone. Approximately 1,500 casualties in the first 8 hours, 30% of the assault force. The bloodiest 8 hours in Marine Corps history to that point. Hill receives the casualty estimates at 1,700 hours. He sits in silence for several minutes, processing numbers that seem impossible. 1,500 casualties. That's a regiment. That's more Americans than died in the entire Battle of Guadalcanal's first day. And Tarawa isn't secured. The beachhead is maybe 800 yards long and 50 yards deep. At this rate of loss, can the assault succeed? Hill asks his operations officer to calculate casualties at current rates over 3 days. The number comes back. Projected 5,000 casualties by D+2. 5,000 casualties to take an island smaller than Central Park. Hill looks at the number and asks a question no admiral wants to ask. Can we evacuate the beachhead if necessary? The evacuation question sends shockwaves through Maryland's flag plot. It's an admission that the assault might fail. It's contemplating something unprecedented in Marine Corps history. Withdrawing from an invasion beach under fire. The operations staff works the problem. Can Navy ships provide enough fire support to cover an evacuation? Can surviving LVTs carry wounded off the beach faster than Japanese can kill them? Can destroyers close enough to shore to suppress Japanese fire? The conclusion is grim. Evacuation would be possible, but would cost hundreds more casualties. Marines trapped against the seawall would have to wade back through 700 yards of lagoon while Japanese fired at them. Wounded would have to be left behind. It would be a disaster. Smith, when informed that Hill is considering evacuation, sends a message that becomes famous. We will not evacuate. issue in doubt is not whether to withdraw, but how to win. But the discussion reveals a deeper problem. The senior commanders 8 miles offshore fundamentally don't understand what's happening on Betio. They don't understand that Tarawa isn't Guadalcanal, where Marines could land on undefended beaches and push inland through jungle. They don't understand that Shibazaki built a fortress where every yard is contested, where bunkers survive bombardment, where defenders fight from positions that can only be destroyed by direct assault. The aerial photographs didn't show this. The intelligence estimates didn't capture it. The planning didn't account for it. And now, Marines are paying for that failure to understand with their lives. By 1800 hours, as the sun begins setting, Hill and Smith receive updated reports from Shoup. 1st Battalion, 8th Marines, has landed in reinforced Red 2. The Beachhead is holding. Casualties are stabilized, horrific, but not increasing at the morning's catastrophic rate. Small groups have pushed 200 yards inland at some points. Most importantly, ammunition has been resupplied. Shoup's assessment: we can hold through the night, need tank support and more ammunition tomorrow to expand Beachhead. Japanese have not counterattacked in strength, do not understand why. That last sentence is key. Japanese doctrine calls for massive night counterattacks. Shibazaki's plan was to push Americans into the sea after dark. But the counterattack isn't happening. The fortress is fighting, but not counterattacking. Something has broken down in Japanese command and control. Hill and Smith don't know it yet, but Admiral Shibazaki is dead, killed by a naval shell in the afternoon. His command bunker took a direct hit from Maryland's 14-inch guns during the afternoon bombardment called in by Shoup. Shibazaki and most of his senior staff were killed instantly. Japanese command has fractured into isolated pockets with no central coordination. The fortress still stands, but no one is orchestrating the defense. Individual bunkers fight magnificently, but there's no one to order the massed counterattack that might have pushed Marines off the beach. This is the lucky break that saves the Beachhead. But Hill and Smith don't know about Shibazaki's death. They just know the expected counterattack hasn't happened. They plan for it anyway, ordering naval gunfire support throughout the night, keeping destroyers on station to fire illumination shells and high-explosive rounds on call. As night falls on November 20th, Hill and Smith sit in Maryland's wardroom reviewing the day. 1,500 casualties. Beachhead barely established. No breakthrough inland, but the Marines are ashore and holding. Tomorrow they'll attack with tank support. Tomorrow they'll push inland. Tomorrow the fortress will crack. Maybe. Hill looks at casualty lists, reading names of dead officers. He sees names of men he knew, men he trained with, men he sent to die on a coral reef in the middle of the Pacific. He asks Smith, was this worth it? 1,500 casualties for this island. Smith doesn't answer immediately. Then, ask me in 3 days when we've secured it. Ask me in 6 months when we've used what we learned here to save lives elsewhere. But don't ask me now. Now all I know is, Marines died today because we got the tide wrong, and we thought naval gunfire could destroy concrete bunkers, and we were wrong about both. Hill nods. They were wrong. And Marines paid for that wrongness with their lives. November 20th, 1830 hours. Betio Island. The sun drops below the horizon, and darkness comes fast, the way it does at the equator. Marines hunker in shallow foxholes scratched into coral sand, preparing for a night they believe might be their last. They've been told Japanese doctrine mandates massive night counterattacks. They've been told to expect banzai charges, human wave assaults, thousands of Japanese soldiers screaming and charging with bayonets. They've been told to fix bayonets, conserve ammunition, and prepare for close quarters fighting in the dark. They grip rifles with white-knuckled hands and stare into the darkness toward Japanese positions 50 yards away. The counterattack must be coming. It has to be coming. Every manual, every intelligence report, every veteran who fought at Guadalcanal has said Japanese forces counterattack at night. The Marines wait and wait. The defensive line on Red Beach 2 curves in an irregular arc, roughly 800 yards long and 30 yards deep at its deepest point. It's not a line, really, more a collection of isolated strongpoints where small groups of Marines occupy shell craters, destroyed bunkers, shallow depressions in the sand. Communication between positions is impossible in the dark. No one has working radios, batteries dead, equipment waterlogged, telephone wire hasn't been laid. Runners can't move without being shot by their own nervous sentries. Each position is isolated, alone, waiting for an attack they can't coordinate a defense against. Colonel Shoup, in his command post bunker, has no way to control the battle if it comes. He can only hope his Marines remember their training. The Marines prepare as best they can with what they have. Most are down to partial magazines after the day's fighting. Some have a few grenades. A lucky few have extra ammunition scavenged from casualties. They arrange grenades within arm's reach, fix bayonets on rifles, chamber rounds. In some positions, Marines draw straws for who sleeps and who watches. In others, no one sleeps. They're too scared, too keyed up on adrenaline, too aware that sleep might mean death if the attack comes. Private Gene Seng, still alive after wading the reef that morning, sits in a crater with 5 other Marines. They've pooled their ammunition, 80 rounds total among 6 men. If the Japanese come in numbers, they'll be overrun in minutes. Seng asks a sergeant from Oklahoma what to do when the ammunition runs out. The sergeant says, use your bayonet, use your e-tool, use your helmet, use anything, and don't let them take you alive. Japanese positions, equally isolated after Shibazaki's death, disrupted command, have no orders for a coordinated counterattack. Individual bunkers and pillboxes hold Japanese soldiers who know the Americans are close but can't coordinate with other positions. Some bunkers still have working telephones but no central command to call. Some have runners but nowhere to send them. The fortress's strength, isolated positions that could fight independently, becomes a weakness when coordination is necessary. Japanese doctrine calls for massed night attacks, but that requires a commander to mass the forces, and the commander is dead. Instead, individual Japanese soldiers in small groups attempt infiltration, probing American lines, looking for weak points. But there's no plan, no coordination, no weight behind the attacks. The first infiltration attempt comes at 2200 hours. A Japanese soldier crawls forward from positions east of Red 2, moving silently through the darkness toward Marine lines. He gets within 10 yards of a foxhole before a Marine sentry sees him silhouetted against the slightly lighter sky. The Marine fires. The Japanese soldier returns fire. A brief firefight erupts, muzzle flashes lighting the darkness, both sides shooting at shadows. More Marines join in, firing at suspected positions. The Japanese soldier is killed. Silence returns. But now every Marine on Red 2 is awake, weapons ready, staring into the dark, seeing threats in every shadow. The slightest sound, a coconut falling, a crab scuttling across sand, triggers bursts of rifle fire. Marines shoot at anything that moves, anything that sounds like movement, anything that might be movement. Navy destroyers provide harassment fire throughout the night, shooting illumination rounds and high explosive shells at Japanese positions. The star shells float down on parachutes, swinging in the wind, casting moving shadows that look like advancing infantry. Marines fire at the shadows. The illumination helps in some ways, lets Marines see actual threats, but hurts in others by creating false targets and keeping everyone hyper-alert. Between illumination rounds, the darkness is absolute. Clouds obscure the moon. No lights exist anywhere on the island except muzzle flashes and explosions. Marines stare into that darkness until their eyes hurt, until they start seeing things that aren't there, until exhaustion and fear create hallucinations. Around midnight, a larger infiltration comes on the boundary between Red 2 and Red 3. Perhaps 20 Japanese soldiers probe the gap between the two beaches, trying to find a seam in Marine defenses. They move quietly, well-trained, spreading out to avoid giving a concentrated target. A Marine machine gun team hears them, footsteps on coral, equipment rattling. The gunner opens fire. Tracers arc through the darkness. Other Marines join in. The firefight lasts 5 minutes. Muzzle flashes and screams, and the sound of bullets hitting flesh. When it ends, 11 Japanese soldiers are dead in the no-man's land between positions. The rest withdraw. Marines brace for the follow-up attack that Doctrine says should come. It doesn't. The night returns to tense silence, broken by occasional single shots and the whistle of star shells. In his command post, Shoup monitors reports from company commanders who manage to send runners. The reports are consistent: isolated infiltration attempts, no massed assault, ammunition holding for now. Shoup doesn't understand why the Japanese aren't attacking in strength. He's grateful, but confused. Every intelligence assessment predicted banzai charges. Every veteran of Guadalcanal said to expect human wave assaults, but they're not coming. Shoup considers the possibilities. Maybe Japanese casualties in the day fighting were heavier than estimated. Maybe command and control broke down. Maybe they're waiting for a better moment. He orders Marines to stay alert, conserve ammunition, prepare for attack at dawn. He doesn't sleep. Command post personnel take turns at watch, but Shoup stays awake, monitoring radio traffic, making decisions, waiting for the assault that will determine whether Marines hold the beachhead or get pushed into the sea. At 0300, the quietest hour of night, a single Japanese soldier walks into Marine lines on Red One. He's not attacking. He's walking slowly, hands at his sides, wounded, delirious. A Marine sentry challenges him. The Japanese soldier keeps walking, either not hearing or not understanding. The sentry fires. The soldier falls. Later examination shows he was wounded in the chest and stomach, probably bleeding internally, walking toward what he thought were his own lines. It's a small tragedy inside the larger tragedy. One confused man dying alone in the dark. But it's also indicative of the Japanese situation. Command broken, soldiers isolated, no coordination, men fighting and dying in small groups with no larger plan. As dawn approaches at 0530, the sky begins lightening in the east. Marines have survived the night. The expected counterattack never came. They're relieved, exhausted, confused. Some sleep finally, collapsing from adrenaline, crash, and sleep deprivation. Others stay alert, not trusting the quiet. The night's infiltration left perhaps 30 Japanese soldiers dead in no man's land between the lines. Marine casualties from night fighting, about 20 killed or wounded, mostly from Japanese infiltration or from Marines accidentally shooting each other in the darkness. It could have been so much worse. If the Japanese had attacked in strength, if they'd coordinated a 1,000-man assault against the fragile beachhead, the Marines might have broken. But the attack didn't come because Admiral Shibazaki, who would have ordered it, lay dead under tons of concrete and sand. As full light arrives at 0600 on November 21st, D+1, Marines emerge from foxholes and assess the situation. The beachhead held. They're still alive. Ammunition is low, but not gone. Casualties are being evacuated on LVTs that managed to run the Reef gauntlet during the night. The lagoon between Reef and shore still contains floating bodies from yesterday's assault. Marines who never made it to the beach, still in the water, bloating in the tropical heat. The sight is devastating. The smell is worse. Robert Sherrod, the correspondent, walks the beach at dawn and writes, "The smell of death is everywhere. Bodies everywhere you look. In the water, on the beach, in the foxholes. This is what hell smells like if hell exists." He takes photographs that won't be published for weeks, images too graphic for American newspapers accustomed to sanitized war coverage. Shoup conducts a commander's conference at dawn, gathering officers from surviving units. The butcher's bill from D-Day is grim. Approximately 800 killed, 700 wounded among the assault force. Some units suffered catastrophic losses. Company K, 2nd Marines, lost 60% of its men. Company I lost all its officers and most NCOs. 3rd Battalion, 2nd Marines, is combat ineffective, down to 30% strength. But the Marines hold the beach and a narrow strip of land behind it. Today they'll push inland. Today they'll break the fortress. Today the tanks will arrive. Sherman medium tanks that were supposed to land on D-Day but got delayed. With tank support, Marines can destroy bunkers systematically instead of dying attacking them with grenades and flamethrowers. The tide is turning, literally and figuratively. The physical tide is higher, making reinforcement easier. The tactical tide is shifting as Japanese command breakdown prevents coordinated defense. The nightmare of D-Day is over. The grinding work of securing the island is just beginning. November 21st, 0700 hours. Red Beach 3. The first Sherman tank to successfully reach Betio's shore crawls over the seawall, treads grinding against coconut logs, engine roaring. Marines watch it climb onto solid ground and cheer. They've been fighting bunkers with rifles and grenades for 24 hours. Now they have armor. Now they have a 75mm gun that can blast through concrete. Now they have something that can take a hit and keep fighting. The tank is named Colorado, and it's commanded by Lieutenant Louis Larget, a 23-year-old from Pennsylvania, who's about to prove that tanks can change the character of close-quarters combat, even on a tiny island where conventional doctrine says armor is useless. Colorado pivots, tracks throwing sand, and heads toward a bunker complex that's been killing Marines since D-Day. The war on Tarawa is about to change. The Sherman M4A2 medium tank is 30 tons of steel powered by a diesel engine, armed with a 75mm main gun and 3 machine guns, crewed by 4 men packed into a space barely larger than a phone booth. It's designed for fighting other tanks on European plains, not for island warfare against fortified positions 50 yards apart. Naval planners initially said tanks would be useless on Tarawa, too heavy for the coral, too large for the narrow spaces, too vulnerable to anti-tank weapons. Colonel Shoup ignored them and demanded tanks anyway. He was right. The tanks that make it ashore on D+1 become the single most important factor in breaking Japanese resistance. But getting them ashore is its own nightmare. 14 Sherman tanks were assigned to the assault. They were loaded onto medium landing ships, LCMs, for transport to shore. The LCMs are designed to beach, drop their ramps, and let tanks drive off onto dry sand. But Tarawa has no dry sand, just reef and lagoon and Japanese fire. The first tank LCM arrives at the reef on D-Day morning, lowers its ramp, and the tank driver realizes the water is 8 feet deep. Shermans can wade through 4 feet of water with proper preparation. 8 feet is drowning depth. The driver backs up. The LCM tries to find a shallower approach. Japanese gunners watch this dance and start firing 40mm anti-boat guns at the LCM. The LCM takes 3 hits and withdraws. The tanks don't land on D-Day. The second attempt comes at high tide on D-Day evening. 4 LCMs approach Red Beach 3, where the water over the reef is deepest. The first LCM beaches successfully. The ramp drops. The tank drives forward into 4 feet of water. The driver guns the engine. The tank surges forward, treads grab coral, and it climbs up onto the beach. Success. The second tank follows. It makes it halfway across the reef before the engine floods and dies. The crew sits in a disabled tank in 4 feet of water, while Japanese machine guns fire at them. They button up, close all hatches, and sit for 3 hours waiting for a recovery vehicle. The third tank drowns in a shell crater that wasn't visible from the LCM. The fourth tank makes it to shore. 2 tanks operational on D-Day evening. Not enough to matter. But D+1 brings higher tides and better coordination. 6 more Shermans make it ashore in the morning, bringing the total to 8 operational tanks. They distribute among the 3 red beaches, 2 or 3 per beach, and begin systematic bunker destruction. The tactics evolve quickly. A tank approaches a bunker, infantry follows 10 to 15 yards behind. The tank fires its 75mm gun into the bunker's firing slit at point-blank range. The armor-piercing round penetrates the concrete, explodes inside, kills everyone inside, or stuns them. Infantry rushes forward, tosses grenades through the entrance, clears the bunker. Move to the next bunker. Repeat. It's methodical, it's brutal, it's effective. In 2 hours, Colorado destroys 7 bunkers that had resisted infantry attacks for a day. But the Japanese have anti-tank weapons, 40mm guns that can penetrate Sherman armor at close range, magnetic mines that infantry can attach to tank hulls, suicide attacks where soldiers run at tanks with satchel charges. At 1100 hours, a Sherman named Cecilia takes a direct hit from a 40mm gun on Red Beach 2. The round penetrates the driver's compartment. The tank brews up, catches fire. Ammunition cooks off. Secondary explosions tearing through the hull. The crew has seconds to escape. The driver and bow gunner burn to death. The turret crew, gunner and commander, bail out through the top hatch. They're on fire. They roll in the sand, trying to extinguish flames. Marines rush to help them. Both survive, but with horrific burns. Cecilia burns for an hour, exploding periodically as ammunition detonates. It's a reminder that tanks are vulnerable, that crews are mortal, that there's no invulnerability in war. Lieutenant Larget in Colorado develops tactics through trial and error. He learns to approach bunkers from angles that minimize exposure to anti-tank fire. He learns to fire multiple rounds into bunkers, the first to penetrate, the second to detonate inside, the third to ensure destruction. He learns to coordinate with infantry, using them to spot threats he can't see from inside the tank. Tank vision is terrible, a few periscopes offering narrow fields of view. Blind spots everywhere. Infantry keeps him from being flanked or attacked from behind. In return, he destroys positions infantry can't touch. It's symbiosis born from necessity. By afternoon, the 8 operational Shermans have destroyed dozens of bunkers and broken the defensive cohesion on all 3 red beaches. Marines follow the tanks inland, advancing 200 yards in some sectors, 300 in others. It's the first significant advance since D-Day morning. The cost is high. 4 tanks destroyed or disabled, 12 crewmen killed or wounded. But the impact is decisive. Bunkers that could withstand naval bombardment, that could survive grenades and satchel charges, cannot survive 75mm rounds at 50 yards. The concrete cracks, the walls collapse, the defenders inside die or retreat. The fortress is crumbling. Japanese defenders adapt, targeting tanks with everything available. A tank advancing on Red One takes fire from 3 positions simultaneously: machine guns, anti-tank gun, and rifle grenades. The commander, Sergeant Robert Fenster, keeps the tank moving, firing back, calling targets to his gunner. The 75mm gun destroys the anti-tank position. The bow machine gun suppresses the infantry. The tank survives. Fenster will destroy 11 bunkers before his tank throws a track and becomes immobile. Even then, it serves as a stationary pillbox, suppressing Japanese positions until it runs out of ammunition the next day. Tank infantry coordination improves through the day as both sides learn to work together. Infantry starts marking targets with smoke grenades, showing tank commanders which bunkers to engage. Tanks start calling for infantry support when Japanese soldiers try to close for magnetic mine attacks. A system emerges. Tank advances to contact, infantry follows, tank suppresses bunker, infantry closes and clears, both move to next position. It's basic combined arms tactics, the kind taught at officer school, but it has to be learned in combat because no one trained for this specific scenario. The learning curve is steep and paid for in blood, but by evening, the system works. As darkness falls on D+1, 8 tanks are positioned at key points in the beachhead. 4 are operational and can move. 4 are disabled, but can still shoot. Together, they provide mobile firepower and armored protection that fundamentally changes the battlefield dynamics. Shoup, reviewing the day's progress, realizes tanks are the key to breaking the fortress. He requests more tank support for D+2. He's told no more tanks are available. The rest were lost at the Reef or disabled mechanically. The 8 he has are all he'll get. He tells his tank commanders, "Make them count. We take this island bunker by bunker, and you're the sledgehammer." The tanks will continue destroying positions through D+2 and D+3, grinding through Shibazaki's fortress until nothing remains but rubble and bodies. November 21st, 0800 hours. Green Beach, western end of Betio. Major Michael Ryan stands on a beach he wasn't supposed to land on, commanding troops he's barely in contact with, looking at an island he's supposed to help capture from the wrong direction. Ryan's 700 Marines landed on Green Beach yesterday evening in a hasty diversion when Red Beach 1 became untenable. They fought through the night isolated from the main force, pushed inland this morning, and now Ryan realizes he's achieved something remarkable. His isolated battalion has cut Betio in half. The Japanese defenders are split. The fortress is fracturing, and Ryan's Marines, exhausted and low on ammunition, are about to prove that initiative and aggression can compensate for isolation and confusion. They push east toward Colonel Shoop's positions, attacking Japanese defenders from the rear, destroying the fortress from the inside out. Ryan's force is an orphan battalion, the stepchild of the invasion plan. 1st Battalion, 2nd Marines was supposed to land on Red Beach 1, but that beach was a slaughterhouse on D-Day. Ryan, circling offshore in an LVT, watched Marines die on Red 1 and made a command decision: land somewhere else. He spotted Green Beach on Betio's western tip, less heavily defended, and took his battalion there without orders. It was the right decision. By landing on Green Beach, Ryan flanked Japanese positions covering Red 1. By attacking east, he relieved pressure on Shoop's beleaguered forces, but it left Ryan isolated, cut off, fighting a separate battle with no communication to higher command. For 24 hours, no one knew if Ryan's battalion was alive, dead, or captured. The attack east begins at 0800 with Ryan's Marines advancing along Betio's southern shore, moving through positions Japanese built, facing north toward the expected American landing. The fortifications are formidable, but oriented wrong. Bunkers designed to fire at approaching landing craft have limited fields of fire toward the rear. Machine gun positions cover beaches but leave blind spots inland. Ryan's Marines exploit these weaknesses, attacking bunkers from behind, destroying positions that were supposed to be invulnerable. A platoon from Company A finds a major bunker complex, approaches from the rear where there are no firing slits, and drops white phosphorus grenades through the ventilation system. The bunker erupts in screams and white smoke. 15 Japanese soldiers die inside. The platoon moves to the next position. Across the island on Red Beach 2, 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines launches its own attack inland. Major Henry Crow, who spent D-Day watching his Marines die in the lagoon, now leads them across the airfield that bisects Betio. The airfield is 600 yards of open ground, flat as a billiard table, swept by fire from bunkers on the far side. Crossing it is suicide in daylight. Crow knows this. He also knows the airfield must be taken to secure the island. He plans the assault like an industrial operation: artillery preparation on bunkers, smoke screens to obscure Japanese observation, infantry advancing in short rushes from one piece of cover to the next. It's textbook tactics applied to a situation where the textbook says, "Don't attack across open ground under observed fire." The airfield assault begins at 1000 hours with naval gunfire pounding Japanese positions on the far side. Destroyers offshore fire 5-inch shells at bunkers spotted by forward observers. The shells explode in sequence, walking across the Japanese line, suppressing defensive fire. The instant the barrage lifts, Marines of 2nd Battalion surge forward. They're in the open immediately, exposed, running across coral-based runway surface that provides zero cover. Japanese machine gunners who survived the bombardment open fire. Marines fall, others keep running. The battalion crosses in rushes. One platoon runs 50 yards, while another provides covering fire. Then the roles reverse. It's chaos. It's terrifying. It works. Lieutenant William Hawkins, the scout sniper platoon leader, who distinguished himself on D-Day, leads the assault on a bunker complex north of the airfield. Hawkins is already wounded twice. Shoulder hit on D-Day, leg grazed yesterday. But he's still moving, still fighting, still leading attacks on positions other Marines won't approach. He identifies a large bunker firing across the airfield, killing Marines in the crossing. Hawkins gathers a team: 2 flamethrower operators, 4 riflemen, 3 Marines with satchel charges. They crawl forward through scattered debris, using shell craters for cover, getting within 20 yards before Japanese gunners spot them. The assault is textbook and terrible. Hawkins rises, fires his rifle at the bunker's firing slit to suppress the gunners, then waves the flamethrower team forward. One operator is hit immediately, killed by a burst of machine gun fire. Hawkins picks up the fallen flamethrower, 60 pounds of tanks and hose, and runs toward the bunker. He gets within 15 feet, aims the nozzle at the firing slit, and triggers a stream of burning fuel. Flame shoots through the slit into the bunker, screams from inside. The satchel charge team runs up and tosses explosives through the entrance. Hawkins waves them back. The charges detonate. The bunker collapses partially. Hawkins moves to check it, to ensure it's destroyed. A Japanese soldier inside, wounded but alive, fires a burst from a Nambu machine gun. Hawkins is hit multiple times in the chest. He falls. Marines rush to him, but he's dead before they reach him. Lieutenant William Dean Hawkins, 29 years old, dies destroying a bunker on an island most Americans will never hear of. He'll receive the Medal of Honor posthumously. It won't bring him back. By 1600 hours, elements of Ryan's force on the west and Shoup's force on the east link up near the island's center. A sergeant from Ryan's battalion meets a corporal from Shoup's force in a destroyed Japanese command post. They're both surprised to find friendly forces coming from the opposite direction. The sergeant radios Ryan. "We've reached Shoup's people. Island is cut in half. Japanese split into pockets." Ryan receives the message and allows himself a moment of satisfaction. His orphan battalion, isolated and written off by commanders offshore, has achieved a major objective. Betio is no longer a unified fortress. It's fragmented into isolated strongpoints that can be reduced individually. The afternoon brings systematic bunker clearing across the island. Marines develop a rhythm: identify bunker, suppress with rifle fire, approach with flamethrower and demolitions, destroy, move to next position. The flamethrower satchel charge combination becomes standard procedure. Flamethrower shoots flame through firing slit, killing or disorienting defenders. Satchel charge, a canvas bag containing 20 pounds of explosives, gets tossed through the entrance and detonates, collapsing the bunker or killing everyone inside. It's brutal work. Flamethrower operators have life expectancies measured in minutes when they expose themselves. Demolition teams take heavy casualties. But the bunkers fall one after another. Japanese defenders fight with the desperation of men who know they're doomed. They don't surrender. They don't retreat. They fight from bunkers until killed, then the next position takes up the fight. American Marines, exhausted and increasingly angry after watching friends die for 2 days, show less mercy as the day progresses. Bunkers that might have been bypassed on D-Day are now systematically destroyed. Japanese soldiers attempting to surrender are sometimes shot. Marines too keyed up, too angry, too traumatized to accept surrender after what they've endured. It's a dark side of the battle rarely discussed, but it happens. War does this to men. By evening of D+1, the territorial gains are significant. Marines control the airfield. They've pushed 300 yards inland in several sectors. The beachhead has expanded from a desperate toehold to a genuine lodgment, but the cost continues to mount. D+1 casualties, 344 killed, 1,087 wounded. It's lower than D-Day, small comfort to the men dying, but the trend is better. The fortress is breaking. The tide, literal and tactical, has turned. Japanese defenders are isolated in pockets on the eastern tail of the island and in scattered bunkers throughout the captured area. The question is no longer whether Marines will take Tarawa, but how many more will die doing it. Colonel Shoup, still operating from his bullet-pocked command post, reviews reports and makes his first optimistic assessment since landing. He radios Admiral Hill. "Significant progress today. Airfield secured. Island bisected. Enemy fragmented. Expect to complete operations D+2 or D+3. Casualties remain heavy, but decreasing. Request continued naval gunfire support and ammunition resupply." Hill receives the message with relief. The invasion isn't failing, it's succeeding, slowly, bloodily, but succeeding. He authorizes everything Shoup requests and adds a personal message. "Well done, keep pushing." Shoup reads the message, grunts, and returns to coordinating attacks. Congratulations can wait until the island is secured and the dead are counted. November 22nd, D+2, eastern end of Betio Island. The sun rises over approximately 500 to 700 Japanese survivors, compressed into the final 600 yards of coral and coconut palms at Betio's tail. These are Shibazaki's remaining defenders, cut off from the main fortress, surrounded on 3 sides by Marines, backed against the ocean. They have no hope of relief, no possibility of escape, no chance of victory. Japanese military doctrine and Bushido codes say they should fight to the death. They will. For the next 24 hours, Marines will wage a close-quarters battle of annihilation, destroying the last organized resistance on Tarawa, discovering that even defeated Japanese forces remain deadly until physically eliminated. The final defenders will sell their lives expensively, taking Marines with them, demonstrating the fundamental cultural gulf that will define Pacific combat for the next 2 years. The Eastern Pocket is a nightmare of overlapping bunkers and interlocking fire. Japanese engineers built the densest fortifications here, anticipating Americans might approach from the east. 40 major bunkers in 600 yards of front, every position connected by trenches. Every bunker supporting the others, fields of fire overlapping so completely that attacking one position exposes Marines to fire from 3 others. Shoup studies aerial photographs and realizes the Eastern Pocket will cost more casualties than the rest of the island combined. He develops a plan: isolate the pocket, pound it with naval gunfire and artillery, then reduce it position by position with tanks and infantry. It's the only way. It's also going to be a slaughterhouse. The bombardment begins at 0700. Destroyers offshore fire 5-inch guns at bunkers marked on targeting charts. Army artillery that landed yesterday adds 105mm shells. The bombardment is heavier and more accurate than D-Day's pre-landing fire because forward observers can now see targets and adjust fire. For 90 minutes, high explosive rains on the Eastern Pocket. Marines watch from positions 500 yards away, seeing bunkers disappear in explosions, seeing coconut palms shredded, seeing the earth churned into moonscape. When the fire lifts, officers peer through binoculars expecting to see destruction. What they see is Japanese soldiers emerging from bunkers, returning to weapons, preparing for the assault they know is coming. The fortress continues to resist. At 0900, Marines attack. 2 companies, approximately 300 men, supported by 2 Sherman tanks. The plan is simple: advance in line, destroy every bunker encountered, keep moving until reaching the ocean. Reality is more complicated. The lead elements advance 50 yards before encountering the first bunker. The tank fires 3 rounds into it. Infantry rushes forward to clear it. A Japanese soldier inside, wounded and half deaf from the tank fire, opens up with a Nambu machine gun as Marines enter. He kills 2 before being killed himself. The attack bogs down at the first objective. Throughout the morning, the advance continues by yards. Each bunker requires the same procedure: tank fires, infantry assaults, bunker cleared, casualties evacuated, next bunker. The Japanese fight from each position until overwhelmed. Then survivors retreat to the next bunker and continue fighting. There are no surrenders. A Marine platoon surrounds a small bunker, calls for occupants to surrender in Japanese using a translator. The response is a grenade thrown from the firing slit. The Marines respond with a satchel charge that collapses the bunker, killing everyone inside. They find 7 bodies in the wreckage, including a wounded officer who could have surrendered but chose to fight. American forces attempt to facilitate surrenders, partly from humanitarian concern, partly to reduce casualties among defenders who might otherwise kill Marines before dying. Loudspeakers broadcast surrender appeals in Japanese. You are surrounded. Your situation is hopeless. Surrender, and you will be treated according to international law. The appeals are written by intelligence officers and translated by Nisei, Japanese-American translators serving with Marine forces. The broadcasts continue throughout the day. The response is gunfire. Japanese soldiers, indoctrinated to believe surrender is dishonor worse than death, choose death. Of the estimated 600 to 700 Japanese in the Eastern Pocket, fewer than 10 will surrender. The rest die fighting. The cultural gulf manifests in ways that shock American Marines. A corpsman reaches a wounded Japanese soldier lying in the open, intending to provide medical aid. As the corpsman approaches, the soldier pulls a grenade, killing himself and wounding the corpsman. Marines learn to approach wounded Japanese with weapons ready, to assume every casualty is a potential threat. They find Japanese wounded committing suicide rather than accept help, slitting throats with bayonets, pulling grenade pins, shooting themselves. It's incomprehensible to American forces who view wounded as combatants removed from the fight. But Japanese military culture sees wounded capture as shame, sees suicide as honor. The gap between these worldviews is unbridgeable. By 1400 hours, Marines have fought 200 yards into the eastern pocket at cost of 60 casualties, 20 killed, 40 wounded. The advance continues into afternoon, grinding through bunker after bunker. A Sherman tank commanded by Sergeant Thomas Roberts destroys 8 bunkers in 3 hours, firing until its 75mm ammunition is exhausted, then using machine guns until those run dry. The tank withdraws, resupplies, returns to the fight. By 1700 hours, Marines have reduced the pocket to 300 yards. The surviving Japanese, perhaps 200 men, concentrate in the final bunkers at the island's tail. The final assault comes at 1800 hours with 2 fresh companies committed. They attack from 3 directions simultaneously, compressing the remaining defenders into a shrinking perimeter. Japanese resistance intensifies as space contracts. Wounded defenders fight from foxholes. Officers lead small counterattacks that gain a few yards before being annihilated. A group of 20 Japanese soldiers attempts a banzai charge, screaming and running at Marine positions with bayonets. Machine gun fire cuts them down in seconds. None reach Marine lines. The charge is over in 30 seconds. 20 bodies lie in a rough line where they fell. By nightfall on D+2, organized resistance in the eastern pocket has ended. Marines control the entire eastern tail, except for scattered survivors hiding in bunkers and shell craters. The night brings infiltration attempts and individual last stands. Marines hunting through the darkness find Japanese soldiers in destroyed bunkers, most wounded, all armed, all fighting to the end. A patrol discovers a bunker with 6 Japanese inside. The patrol leader calls for surrender. A burst of machine gun fire answers. The patrol tosses grenades through the entrance, then retreats. Explosions. Silence. The patrol enters to find 6 bodies. This scene repeats throughout the night in dozens of locations. November 23rd, D+3, 0600 hours. Marines conduct final sweeps of the eastern pocket, clearing the last positions, finding the last holdouts. They discover approximately 100 Japanese bodies from the previous day's fighting. They find bunkers collapsed with men inside, suffocated or crushed. They find wounded who died overnight from their injuries, preferring death to capture. They find exactly 4 Japanese soldiers willing to surrender, all wounded too badly to commit suicide. By noon, the eastern pocket is secured. The battle for Betio is effectively over, except for isolated snipers and scattered holdouts who will continue fighting for days. The final Japanese casualty estimate: approximately 4,690 Japanese soldiers and sailors killed, 17 captured, mostly wounded. 129 Korean laborers surrendered. They weren't bound by Japanese military code and chose survival. The surrender rate among Japanese combatants: 0.3%. This statistic will define Pacific warfare for the next 2 years. It means every Japanese-held island must be taken the same way Tarawa was taken, by killing virtually every defender, by reducing every position, by fighting until one side is annihilated. There will be no negotiated capitulations, no mass surrenders, no early endings. Just grinding attrition warfare where the cost of every island is measured in lives. November 23rd, 1800 hours. Colonel David Shoup, standing in the ruins of what was Shibazaki's command bunker, declares Betio Island secure. The battle has lasted 76 hours from first landing to final declaration. Shoup's voice, hoarse from 3 days of shouting orders over gunfire, makes the announcement via radio to Admiral Hill offshore. Betio secured, organized resistance eliminated, mopping up operations continuing, request graves registration support, and medical evacuation for remaining wounded. Hill acknowledges, the Battle of Tarawa is over. The accounting of its cost is just beginning. Already, graves registration teams are moving across the island, photographing bodies, checking dog tags, beginning the grim work of identifying American dead and preparing them for burial at sea or transport home. The island Shoup declares secure looks nothing like the aerial photographs planners studied in Pearl Harbor. Betio has been transformed into a moonscape of craters and rubble. Not a single building stands intact. Coconut palms are shredded stumps. The airfield runway is pocked with shell holes. Japanese bunkers are collapsed or blown open, their concrete walls cracked, their interiors burned. The smell is overwhelming, a mixture of death, cordite, burning fuel, and tropical rot. Marines walk through this landscape wearing cloth masks over their noses, but the masks do little against the stench. Bodies are everywhere, Japanese in bunkers, Marines on beaches, floating in the lagoon. Some have been dead for 3 days in tropical heat. The decay is advanced. Graves registration teams begin the hardest work. They move from body to body, checking for identification. American dead receive careful treatment. Photographed for records, dog tags removed, personal effects collected for families, bodies placed in mattress covers or ponchos for transport. Japanese dead receive mass burial in shell holes and trenches, bulldozers pushing sand over them. It's practical necessity. Nearly 5,000 Japanese bodies in tropical heat create disease hazards, but it's also revealing of how differently the sides view their dead. Americans recover and identify every soldier possible. Japanese doctrine views fallen soldiers as having achieved honor and needing no special treatment. The count of American casualties takes days to finalize. Bodies are scattered across 3 miles of island and lagoon. Some remain on the reef, visible at low tide. Some sank in deep water and will never be recovered. The initial count: 1,009 killed in action, 2,091 wounded, 88 missing. As teams continue searching, the missing number decreases as bodies are found, but some Marines simply disappeared, last seen wading toward shore, never arriving, bodies lost to the ocean. The final accounting will take weeks. Families will receive telegrams. The Secretary of the Navy regrets to inform you. The telegrams begin arriving in late November, hitting American homes during Thanksgiving week, transforming holiday dinners into mourning. Navy Seabees, construction battalions, land on D+3 and begin airfield repairs immediately. They arrive with bulldozers, grading equipment, coral crusher machines. Their job: make the airfield operational within 1 week. They work around corpses, around unexploded ordnance, around Marines still hunting Japanese holdouts. They fill craters with crushed coral, compact the surface, repair the taxiways. The work proceeds 24 hours a day under portable lights. By November 30th, 1 week after the battle ends, a B-24 Liberator bomber lands on Betio's repaired airfield. The bomber refuels and takes off to bomb Japanese positions in the Marshall Islands. The strategic purpose of Tarawa, a base for future operations, is achieved. Robert Sherrod, the Time Life correspondent, walks Betio's beaches on November 24th, notebook in hand, trying to capture what he's witnessed. He writes, "I have seen war at its worst. I have seen men die in ways that should not be possible. I have seen courage that defies description and horror that defies imagination. Tarawa will be remembered, but I'm not certain it will be understood. How do you explain to Americans safe in their homes that young men died by the hundreds for an island they can't find on a map? How do you explain that this was necessary, that this saved lives elsewhere, that this terrible price purchased lessons that will win the war?" His dispatches, published in December 1943, shock American readers. His photographs, Marines dead on the beach, bodies in the water, appear in Life magazine against editorial resistance. They're too graphic, too real, too devastating. But they're published because Americans need to understand the cost. The strategic gain is measured in capability provided. Tarawa gives America an airfield within bomber range of the Marshall Islands. It proves that amphibious assaults against fortified atolls are possible. Difficult, but possible. It provides a base for neutralizing Japanese positions in the Central Pacific, but the cost seems disproportionate to the gain. 1,009 Americans dead for 291 acres. That's 3.5 Marines killed per acre. Compared to Guadalcanal, which cost approximately 1,600 killed over 6 months, Tarawa seems catastrophically expensive. The question everyone asks, from admirals to privates to civilians reading newspapers: was Tarawa worth it? Admiral Nimitz, commanding Pacific Forces, defends the operation in a press conference in December. "Tarawa was necessary," he says. "We learned lessons there that will save thousands of lives in future operations. We learned how to bombard fortified positions effectively. We learned how to coordinate naval gunfire, air support, and ground forces. We learned what equipment works and what doesn't. We learned the importance of tide calculations and reef reconnaissance. Every lesson was purchased with Marine blood, but those lessons make every subsequent landing more effective and less costly." His words are true, but cold comfort to families burying sons and husbands. The Marines who survived Tarawa carry the experience for life. They've seen things that will never leave them. They've lost friends, watched men drown, killed at close range, seen bodies in conditions nightmares are made from. Many develop what's then called combat fatigue, and later will be recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder. Some return to combat in subsequent operations. Kwajalein, Saipan, Iwo Jima, carrying Tarawa's ghosts with them. Some are sent home, too wounded physically or psychologically to continue. All are changed. Private Gene Seng, who survived wading the reef and 3 days of close combat, writes to his mother in December, "I'm alive and I'm grateful, but I'm not the same person who left Ohio. I've seen things I can't describe and wouldn't want to if I could. When I close my eyes, I see the water turning red. I hear the wounded calling for help. I don't know if these memories will ever fade." December 1st, 1943. The last Marines leave Betio Island, replaced by garrison forces who will hold the island and operate the airfield. The 2nd Marine Division boards transports for Hawaii, where they'll rest, refit, and prepare for the next operation. As the ships pull away from Tarawa Atoll, Marines line the rails looking back at the island that cost so many lives. Some cry, some are silent, some are angry. Robert Sherrod watches them and writes, "They are leaving a piece of themselves on that island, not just their friends who died there, but a piece of their own souls. Tarawa took more than lives. It took innocence. It took faith in the cleanness of war. It took the belief that courage and planning could prevent catastrophe. What it gave in return was the knowledge that war is chaos, that plans fail, that good men die randomly, and that victory's price is sometimes almost unbearable." The ships sail toward Pearl Harbor. Behind them, Tarawa recedes into the distance, a tiny coral speck in an endless ocean, marked now with American graves and Japanese bunkers and memories that will never fade. December 1943. Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Navy medical officers sit in a conference room surrounded by casualty reports, statistical analyses, and photographs no civilian will see for months. They're conducting an autopsy of the Battle of Tarawa, not of individual bodies, but of the battle itself. What killed American Marines? Where did they die? Could deaths have been prevented? The questions are clinical, mathematical, necessary. The answers are devastating. Captain James Shoemaker, Chief Medical Officer for the 2nd Marine Division, presents his findings. Approximately 35% of casualties occurred in the water between reef and shore. 45% occurred on the beaches or at the seawall. 20% occurred during inland fighting. The majority of deaths in the water resulted from drowning while wounded or from wounds sustained while wading. We estimate 150 to 200 Marines drowned while trying to reach shore. He pauses, then adds what everyone already knows. These casualties were preventable with better tide intelligence and more amphibious tractors. The final casualty count, compiled after weeks of searching and body recovery, shows 1,027 Americans killed in action. The number seems precise, but represents approximation because 88 bodies were never recovered. Marines last seen wading toward shore, disappearing into the lagoon, presumably drowned and lost to ocean currents. The missing haunt statisticians trying to create accurate records. How do you count a Marine who vanished? Is he killed in action or missing in action? Does the distinction matter to his mother receiving a telegram? The bean counters settle on killed in action presumed dead, a category that satisfies record-keeping requirements but provides no comfort to families. The wounded count is equally grim. 2,292 Marines wounded, many multiply wounded, many evacuated from the island only to die aboard hospital ships. The distinction between killed in action and died of wounds becomes statistical hair-splitting. Both categories represent young men who went to Tarawa and didn't come home. The combined killed and died of wounds number approaches 1,200. The wounded and survived number includes hundreds who will never fully recover. Amputees, burn victims, men with shrapnel still lodged in bodies, men psychologically broken. The true cost of Tarawa extends far beyond the killed in action count. Medical analysts break casualties by phase of battle. D-Day, November 20th. Approximately 800 killed, 700 wounded. 60% of total battle casualties occurred in the first 8 hours. D+1, November 21st. 344 killed, 1,087 wounded. D+2 and D+3. Fewer than 100 killed, 300 wounded. The curve is clear. The battle's deadliest hours were the landing and first day. Had the landing been delayed, had the tide been higher, had more LVTs been available, the D-Day casualties might have been half. That's 400 lives, 400 telegrams, 400 families that might have been spared. Lieutenant Colonel Evans Carlson, a Marine observer studying the battle for lessons learned, produces a report examining casualties by cause. Drowning while wounded, approximately 200. Machine gun fire during reef crossing, approximately 300. Artillery and mortar fire on beaches, approximately 150. Small arms fire during inland fighting, approximately 200. Tank and demolition accidents, approximately 50. Friendly fire, approximately 25. Other causes, 100. The report includes a devastating conclusion. The majority of casualties in categories 1 and 2 could have been prevented by proper tide calculation and adequate amphibious vehicle allocation. This represents a failure of planning that cost approximately 500 American lives. The LVT loss analysis reveals another planning failure. Of 125 LVTs employed in the assault, 90 were destroyed or disabled during the battle. That's a 72% loss rate. The vehicles, unarmored and mechanically unreliable, proved vulnerable to Japanese fire and mechanical breakdown. The analysis recommends immediate development of armored LVTs with improved protection and reliability. These recommendations will lead to the LVT-A4 with armor and better armaments. But the new vehicles won't be available until 1944. Tarawa's Marines fought with what was available, and what was available wasn't good enough. The comparison analysis proves most disturbing to planners. Tarawa. 1,027 killed in 76 hours on 291 acres. That's 3.5 killed per acre, 13.5 killed per hour. Guadalcanal, for comparison. 1,598 Marines killed over 6 months on much larger area. That's 0.1 killed per hour. Tarawa's casualty rate per time was more than 100 times higher than Guadalcanal's. Another comparison, the D-Day landing at Normandy, occurring 7 months after Tarawa, will suffer approximately 2,500 American casualties on all beaches combined, spread over 50 miles of coastline with 50,000 troops landing. Tarawa, by contrast, suffered 3,400 casualties on 1.5 miles of beach with 12,000 engaged. The casualty density is shocking. Unit loss analysis reveals catastrophic impacts on specific companies. Company K, 2nd Battalion, 2nd Marines, suffered 68% casualties. Company, I lost all officers and 80% of enlisted men. 3rd Battalion, 2nd Marines, was reduced to 30% effective strength by D-Day evening. Some platoons ceased to exist as organized units, completely wiped out during the reef crossing or beach fighting. The 2nd Marine Division, which embarked for Tarawa at full strength, returned to Hawaii at 65% strength, with many survivors wounded or psychologically damaged. Rebuilding the division required months and thousands of replacements. The lessons learned analysis, compiled by Marine planners, identifies specific failures and recommendations. Failure 1, insufficient pre-landing bombardment. Recommendation, extend bombardment duration from hours to days. Failure 2, inadequate tide intelligence. Recommendation, submarine periscope reconnaissance and local consultation mandatory. Failure 3, insufficient amphibious vehicles. Recommendation, double LVT allocation and develop armored variants. Failure 4, poor ship-to-shore communication. Recommendation, waterproof radios and redundant communication systems. Failure 5, insufficient tank support. Recommendation, land armor on D-Day with infantry. Each recommendation is sound. Each represents a lesson purchased with lives. The cost-benefit analysis conducted for Admiral Nimitz attempts to answer whether Tarawa was worth the price. Strategic benefits, airfield for future operations, proof of concept for amphibious assaults, lessons that improve future operations, Japanese resources diverted from other theaters. Strategic costs, 1,027 killed, 2,292 wounded, extensive material losses, political backlash from American public. The analysis concludes, Tarawa achieved its strategic objectives but at higher cost than anticipated. The lessons learned justify the operation retrospectively, as subsequent operations at Kwajalein, Saipan, and Iwo Jima demonstrated improved techniques and reduced casualty rates. However, better planning and reconnaissance could have reduced Tarawa casualties by 30 to 50% while achieving the same strategic outcome. December 8, 1943. Western Union offices across America deliver telegrams to families whose sons and husbands died at Tarawa. A mother in Iowa opens her door to find a Western Union messenger, a teenage boy looking uncomfortable, holding an envelope he doesn't want to deliver. She knows what the envelope contains before opening it. The Secretary of the Navy regrets to inform you that your son, Private First Class Robert Morrison, was killed in action on November 20th, 1943, at Tarawa Atoll in the Pacific. He died serving his country. His sacrifice will not be forgotten. The mother reads the telegram, folds it carefully, and sits on her porch. She will sit there for hours, holding the telegram, unable to cry, unable to move, unable to process that her son, who wrote last month about tropical fish in the lagoon, is dead on an island she's never heard of. The arithmetic of death is simple but unbearable. 1,027 American families receive telegrams. 1,027 mothers, fathers, wives, children learn their loved one died at Tarawa. 1,027 funerals will be held in towns across America, many with empty coffins because the bodies are buried at sea or remain on Tarawa in military cemeteries. 1,027 gold stars go up in windows, telling neighbors that this house has given a son to the war. The numbers are statistics in military reports, but they are people in American homes, and the pain they represent is immeasurable. Tarawa killed more than soldiers. It killed pieces of families, pieces of communities, pieces of the American future that died in the coral sand and tropical water. December 1943. Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Admiral Chester Nimitz convenes an emergency conference in the headquarters basement, summoning every senior officer involved in planning and executing the Tarawa operation. The mood is grim. Casualty reports lie on the table like accusations. Nimitz, normally calm and analytical, is angry. "Gentlemen," he begins, "we just lost more than 1,000 Marines taking an island the size of a park. Those men died, in significant part, because our planning was inadequate, our intelligence was wrong, and our equipment was insufficient. We will not make these mistakes again. This conference will not end until we've identified every failure at Tarawa and created solutions that prevent repetition. Every subsequent landing in this war will benefit from what we learned at Tarawa, or those 1,000 Marines died for nothing." The conference lasts 3 days. The lessons identified will reshape amphibious warfare. The first lesson is bombardment duration. Tarawa received 2.5 hours of naval gunfire. The bunkers survived. Colonel Merritt Edson, commanding officer of Naval Operations Staff, presents analysis showing concrete fortifications require sustained bombardment to destroy. 2 hours isn't enough, he says. We need days. Kwajalein will receive 72 hours of continuous bombardment before Marines land. We will pound every position from multiple angles. We will give defenders no time to repair damage. We will destroy bunkers or make them untenable. The recommendation becomes Doctrine. Every subsequent landing receives extended bombardment. Kwajalein, in February 1944, gets 3 days of naval gunfire before assault. Casualties are 80% lower than Tarawa, despite similar Japanese defenses. The second lesson is tide intelligence. The Navy's tide predictions at Tarawa were catastrophically wrong. Marines waded through killing grounds because hydrographers miscalculated reef depth. The solution combines multiple approaches: submarine periscope, reconnaissance at various tide levels, aerial photography at different times of day, consultation with anyone who lived on or near the target island. For Kwajalein, submarines photograph the reef at high, medium, and low tides. Local fishermen from nearby atolls are interviewed. Every available data source is consulted. The result? Accurate prediction of reef conditions, proper timing of assault, minimal casualties during landing phase. The third lesson is amphibious vehicle allocation. Tarawa had 125 LVTs for 5,000 assault troops. Inadequate. Future operations require LVTs for all assault waves, not just the first 3. Additionally, the LVT-1, unarmored and vulnerable, needs replacement. The Marine Corps rushes development of the LVT-A4, armed with a 75mm howitzer, capable of providing fire support while delivering troops. By June 1944 at Saipan, assault forces have 3 times as many LVTs as Tarawa, including 200 armored variants. The difference in casualties is dramatic. The fourth lesson is beach organization. At Tarawa, supplies piled up on the reef because no organization existed to move them forward. Wounded couldn't be evacuated efficiently. Ammunition didn't reach units that needed it. The solution is beach party organization. Designated units responsible for logistics, traffic control, and casualty evacuation. Dedicated supply LVTs ferry materials from reef to shore. Medical LVTs evacuate wounded. Shore party teams organize beaches into zones with designated functions. The system is tested at Kwajalein and proves effective. Marines get ammunition when needed. Wounded reach medical care faster. Beaches function as logistics hubs rather than chaotic killing grounds. The fifth lesson is tank support timing. Tanks arrived too late at Tarawa, reaching shore in numbers only on D+1. Had they landed with assault waves, bunker reduction would have been faster and casualties lower. The solution is amphibious tanks. Sherman's modified with flotation devices and waterproofing, capable of swimming from ships to shore. Additionally, tank infantry coordination doctrine is formalized. Before Tarawa, tank infantry cooperation was improvised. After Tarawa, combined arms teams trained together, develop standard procedures, practice bunker reduction until it's routine. By Iwo Jima, tank infantry teams operate with precision that Tarawa's Marines achieved only through trial and error. The sixth lesson is underwater demolition. Tarawa's reef had obstacles, tetrahedrons, concrete barriers that damaged landing craft. Marines had no capability to clear these before assault. The solution is underwater demolition teams, Navy swimmers who scout beaches, identify obstacles, and blow them up before Marines land. The first UDT teams form in January 1944, specifically because of Tarawa's lessons. By D-Day Normandy in June 1944, UDT doctrine is refined and effective. UDT teams clear obstacles at Saipan, Tinian, Guam. They become essential to every amphibious operation, all because Tarawa showed the need. The seventh lesson is communication. At Tarawa, radios failed from saltwater. Commanders lost contact with units. Confusion reigned. The solution is comprehensive. Waterproof radios, redundant communication systems, forward air controllers embedded with ground units, improved ship-to-shore radio procedures. By Kwajalein, every rifle company has waterproof radios. Battalion commanders have multiple communication methods. Forward air controllers can call in strikes from ships or aircraft in minutes. The communication improvements reduce chaos, enable coordination, save lives. The eighth lesson is casualty prevention and medical care. Tarawa's corpsmen saved lives under impossible conditions, but better systems could have saved more. Solutions include pre-positioned medical supplies and LVTs, dedicated casualty evacuation vehicles, forward surgical teams close to fighting, blood plasma availability. By Iwo Jima, the medical system is sophisticated. Wounded receive plasma within minutes, surgery within hours, evacuation to hospital ships within a day. The survival rate for wounded increases from 70% at Tarawa to 92% at Okinawa, partly because of systems developed in response to Tarawa's medical challenges. The conference produces a document, Lessons Learned at Tarawa. It's classified secret, distributed to amphibious planners throughout the Pacific. Every lesson is annotated with casualty estimates. This failure cost approximately 200 lives. Implementation of this recommendation will prevent similar casualties. The document is brutally honest about mistakes made. It doesn't sugarcoat failures or shift blame. It simply states what went wrong and how to fix it. Admiral Kelly Turner, who commanded the amphibious force at Tarawa, reads the document and makes it required reading for all officers under his command. He adds a cover note. These lessons were purchased with Marine blood. Anyone who ignores them dishonors those who died teaching them. The vindication of Tarawa's lessons comes at Kwajalein in February 1944. Kwajalein is similar to Tarawa, coral atoll, fortified island, determined defenders. But Kwajalein receives 3 days of bombardment, accurate tide intelligence, adequate LVTs, proper beach organization, tank support from D-Day, and all other lessons from Tarawa. Result: 372 Americans killed versus similar-sized defended area. The casualty rate is less than half Tarawa's. Officers study the comparison and realized Nimitz was right. Every life lost at Tarawa purchased lessons that saved lives elsewhere. The lessons continue paying dividends through the war. Saipan: fewer casualties than would have occurred without Tarawa's lessons. Guam: improved amphibious techniques reduce losses. Palaliu: despite being a bloodbath, casualties would have been worse without equipment and tactics developed post-Tarawa. Iwo Jima: horrific casualties, but without Tarawa's lessons, the operation might have been impossible. Okinawa: the final amphibious assault, conducted with precision and coordination unimaginable in November 1943. Every landing benefits from Tarawa's bloody education. A grim calculation emerges from the analysis. Tarawa cost 1,027 American lives. The lessons learned prevented an estimated 10,000 casualties in subsequent operations. Marine Corps historians, writing after the war, conclude, Tarawa was the most expensive military education in American history, measured by cost per lesson. It was also the most valuable. Without Tarawa's brutal classroom, subsequent amphibious operations would have suffered catastrophic casualties. The Central Pacific Offensive might have been abandoned. The war might have lasted years longer. This doesn't make Tarawa's cost acceptable, but it makes it comprehensible. Those Marines didn't die for a meaningless island. They died teaching lessons that saved thousands of their brothers in battles yet to come. Nimitz, reflecting on Tarawa in his memoirs after the war, writes, I have been asked many times whether Tarawa was necessary, whether we could have bypassed it, whether the price was worth paying. My answer is always the same. Tarawa was necessary not for its strategic location, but for what it taught us. We couldn't have known what we learned there without going there. We couldn't have practiced on a less defended island because the lessons required learning against maximum resistance. Tarawa was terrible. Tarawa was necessary. Both statements are true, and no amount of analysis can reconcile them. We can only honor those who died there by ensuring their deaths taught us how to save lives elsewhere. It's the closest thing to justification that Tarawa will ever receive, and for the families who lost sons and husbands, it will never be enough. December 1943, Naval Hospital, Pearl Harbor. Ward: 12 holds Tarawa casualties too wounded to return to duty. too damaged to fight again. Private First Class Gene. Seng lies in a bed near the window, his leg in traction after surgeons remove shrapnel from his thigh and knee. He's one of the lucky ones. He'll walk again, probably with a limp, but he'll walk. 2 beds over, a corporal from Texas has no legs below the knees, lost when a Japanese mortar landed next to him on Red Beach 2. The corporal stares at the ceiling 16 hours a day, saying nothing, eating when nurses feed him, otherwise motionless. 4 beds down, a sergeant from California screams in his sleep every night, reliving the wade from reef to shore, watching friends drown while he was powerless to help. The doctors call it combat fatigue. Later generations will call it post-traumatic stress disorder. Whatever the name, Tarawa inflicted wounds that doctors can't fix. The hospital ships that evacuated casualties from Tarawa arrived at Pearl Harbor in late November, carrying 2,000 wounded. The wounded ranged from minor injuries, shrapnel wounds, broken bones, burns, to catastrophic trauma that challenged Navy medicine. Surgeons worked 20-hour shifts treating traumatic amputations, severe burns, abdominal wounds, head injuries. The mortality rate among wounded who reached Pearl Harbor was low. Most who survived to the hospital ships survived, but survival didn't mean recovery. Hundreds faced months or years of treatment, multiple surgeries, rehabilitation that might restore function or might leave them permanently disabled. Physical wounds were visible, measurable, treatable. Psychological wounds were invisible, harder to diagnose, nearly impossible to treat with 1940s medicine. Marines who survived Tarawa exhibited symptoms that doctors struggled to categorize: nightmares, flashbacks, anxiety, depression, emotional numbness, rage. Some couldn't sleep. Some couldn't eat. Some flinched at loud noises. Some withdrew from human contact. The Navy's psychiatric resources were limited. Treatment consisted mostly of rest, reassurance, and time. Some Marines recovered, some didn't. Some returned to combat, carrying Tarawa's ghosts with them. Some were discharged and sent home, where families struggled to help men who had changed in ways they couldn't articulate. The letters home began arriving in American mailboxes in early December. Marines who survived Tarawa wrote to families, trying to explain what they had experienced, struggling to find words for horrors that transcended language. A corporal from Ohio writes, "I'm alive and I'm grateful, but I can't explain what it was like. The official reports say we took Tarawa in 76 hours. They don't say what those 76 hours contained. They don't say what I saw in the water and on that beach. I'm safe now, but I'm not okay, and I don't know if I'll ever be okay." His mother reads the letter and doesn't understand what happened to her son. She writes back, "Come home if you can. We love you. You're safe now." But he's not safe. Safety is relative when nightmares bring you back to the reef every night. The families who received death notifications faced different struggles. Gold Star mothers, mothers who lost sons in war, formed support groups, finding solace with women who shared their grief. But the grief was complicated by distance and absence. Many Tarawa dead were buried at sea or in temporary cemeteries on the island. Families had no graves to visit, no bodies to mourn over. The absence made grief abstract, surreal. Mrs. Emily Morrison, who lost her son Robert on D-Day, tells a reporter, "I keep expecting him to walk through the door. I know he's gone, but I can't accept it because there's no evidence. No body, no grave, just a telegram and a flag and a hole in my life that will never be filled." The public reaction to Tarawa was complex and divided. Robert Sherrod's dispatches, published in Time and Life magazines, shocked Americans with their graphic descriptions of casualties. Photographs of Marine dead on Betio's beaches, published against military objections, brought the war's reality into American living rooms. Some Americans reacted with renewed determination to support the war effort, to ensure soldiers' sacrifices weren't wasted. Others questioned whether such losses were necessary, whether the military was spending American lives recklessly. Congressmen received letters demanding explanations. Why did Tarawa cost so many lives? Could it have been avoided? Was the island worth the price? The military's public response emphasized strategic necessity and lessons learned. Secretary of the Navy, Frank Knox, at a press conference in mid-December, defended the operation. Tarawa was strategically necessary and successfully executed. Casualties were heavy, but acceptable given the objective's importance. Our forces performed with exceptional courage under difficult conditions. The lessons learned will reduce casualties in future operations. The words were calculated to reassure the public while acknowledging losses. They satisfied some Americans. Others remained skeptical, unconvinced that a coral atoll justified 1,000 American deaths. The Medal of Honor recommendations from Tarawa totaled 8, eventually awarded to 6 recipients. Lieutenant William Dean Hawkins received the award posthumously for his repeated assaults on Japanese positions, despite wounds. Staff Sergeant William Bourdillon received it for destroying multiple pillboxes before being killed by Japanese fire. First Lieutenant Alexander Bonnyman received it for leading an assault on a bunker complex that cost his life. The awards recognized extraordinary valor, but they also underscored the battle's cost. Every Medal of Honor story from Tarawa ended with the recipient's death. Heroism at Tarawa was inseparable from sacrifice. Marine reunions began informally in late 1943 as survivors gathered in Pearl Harbor, recovering from wounds, waiting for reassignment. They didn't talk much about Tarawa at first. The experience was too fresh, too raw. But gradually, in small groups, veterans began sharing stories, validating each other's experiences, creating collective memory of what they had endured. A corporal who waded the reef met another who made the same wade 50 yards away. They'd never spoken during the battle, but now they sat together in silence, both knowing what the other survived, neither needing words. These informal gatherings became the foundation for formal reunions that would continue for decades. The survivors carried physical reminders of Tarawa, scars from shrapnel, stiff joints from wounds, missing fingers or limbs. But the deeper scars were psychological. Sergeant Thomas Roberts, the tank commander who destroyed 8 bunkers, returned to duty but couldn't close his eyes without seeing Japanese soldiers burning in bunkers he'd flamed. Private Gene Seng recovered from his leg wounds and was sent home, but he jumped at car backfires and couldn't watch fireworks on 4th of July. Because the sounds triggered memories of artillery on Tarawa. Corpsman Stanley Bowen, who treated 84 Marines on Red Beach 2, developed a compulsion to check on people, to ensure they weren't wounded and bleeding because he'd seen too many men die from wounds he couldn't treat. The question that haunted survivors was simple and unanswerable. Why did I survive when others didn't? The randomness of survival troubled them. A Marine who waded the reef survived while the man next to him drowned. A machine gunner whose bunker was destroyed survived while his entire team died. A rifleman took shrapnel in the arm, while a friend 3 feet away took the same shrapnel in the chest and died. There was no logic to it, no justice, no reason. Survival was random, and the randomness made it impossible to process. Survivors felt guilt. I should have died instead of him. And relief, I'm alive, and anger. Why him and not me? The emotional complexity was overwhelming. The return home for Marines who survived and were sent back to the United States was disorienting. They left Hawaii in December 1943, arriving at West Coast ports in early 1944. They stepped off ships into America, where people went to work and shopped and complained about rationing and had no comprehension of what had happened at Tarawa. The gap between their experience and civilian understanding was unbridgeable. A Marine tried explaining Tarawa to his father in Oregon and gave up midway through, realizing his father couldn't understand and he couldn't articulate it. The Marine went silent, carrying Tarawa inside, telling no one, letting the memories fester because sharing was impossible. By early 1944, Tarawa was fading from American consciousness. The war continued. New battles demanded attention. Sicily, Italy, the build-up toward D-Day in Europe. Tarawa became a footnote, mentioned briefly in news reports, quickly forgotten, as newer operations dominated headlines. The veterans felt the forgetting acutely. They'd given everything at Tarawa, lost friends, nearly died themselves. And America was moving on like it never happened. The bitterness grew. Years later, Tarawa veterans would describe feeling abandoned by a nation that forgot their sacrifice as soon as the next battle began. They were heroes in November 1943 and forgotten by March 1944, August 1945, Tokyo Bay, Japan. Aboard the USS Missouri, General Douglas MacArthur accepts Japan's unconditional surrender, ending World War II. The path from Tarawa to this moment runs through dozens of islands, hundreds of battles, tens of thousands of American lives. But Tarawa was first. Tarawa was the test case that proved amphibious assaults against fortified islands were possible. Tarawa was the classroom where America learned to wage war across the Central Pacific. The veterans who survived Tarawa, watching Japanese officials sign surrender documents, know their sacrifice at that tiny coral atoll contributed to this moment. The line from Tarawa to Tokyo Bay is direct, traceable, undeniable. Tarawa made this victory possible. The strategic vindication of Tarawa becomes clear in retrospect. The lessons learned there shaped every subsequent amphibious operation. Kwajalein in February 1944 used extended bombardment, 72 hours instead of 2.5, and suffered 372 killed versus Tarawa's 1,027. Saipan in June 1944 employed underwater demolition teams and armored LVTs, reducing landing casualties by 60% compared to what they would have been without these innovations. Iwo Jima in February 1945, despite being horrific, was manageable only because of equipment and tactics developed in response to Tarawa's failures. The Central Pacific Offensive, which brought America from Hawaii to Japan's doorstep, was built on foundations laid in Tarawa's coral sand. The cost-effectiveness calculation, conducted by military historians after the war, estimates Tarawa's lessons prevented approximately 10,000 casualties in subsequent operations. The math is speculative but based on reasonable assumptions. If Kwajalein had been conducted with Tarawa-level planning, casualties would have been 800 instead of 372. If Saipan had lacked UDT teams and armored LVTs, casualties would have been double. If Iwo Jima had been attempted without tank infantry coordination doctrine, it might have been impossible. The accumulated savings across a dozen amphibious operations totals thousands of lives. By this calculation, Tarawa's 1,027 killed purchased 10,000 lives saved. It's cold mathematics. But it's how military planners justify the operation. But the vindication came too late for the families who lost sons and husbands at Tarawa. Mrs. Emily Morrison, who lost her son Robert on D-Day, never accepted that her boy's death served a greater strategic purpose. "They say his sacrifice saved others," she told an interviewer in 1950. "But he's still dead. Strategy doesn't bring him back. Purpose doesn't fill the emptiness. I'm proud of his service, but I'd trade all the strategy in the world to have him walk through my door one more time." This tension between strategic necessity and individual tragedy defines Tarawa's legacy. Both are true. Neither negates the other. The 1960s and 70s brought Tarawa veterans returning to Betio Island, now part of the independent nation of Kiribati. They found an island transformed. The bunkers still stand, concrete fortifications overgrown with vegetation, but intact. The reef where hundreds died is now a peaceful lagoon. The beaches where Marines fought are occupied by local villagers who know little of the battle's history. The veterans walk the island, trying to reconcile memory with reality, trying to show their children and grandchildren where it happened, struggling to convey what it meant. Some found closure in the return. Some found only painful memories refreshed. The forgetting troubled veterans profoundly. By the 1980s, most Americans couldn't name the Battle of Tarawa. Ask about World War II battles, and they'd mention Normandy, Pearl Harbor, maybe Iwo Jima. Tarawa? Never heard of it. This obscurity bothered veterans who felt their sacrifice deserved remembrance. They formed veterans associations, organized reunions, lobbied for memorial construction. The Tarawa Makan Veterans Association worked to preserve memory, to ensure the battle wasn't forgotten entirely, to honor the dead who gave everything for an island most Americans couldn't find on a map. The comparison with Normandy particularly rankled Tarawa veterans. D-Day at Normandy, June 6, 1944, became iconic, memorialized in films and books and presidential speeches. Normandy's casualties per capita were lower than Tarawa's, despite the larger scale. Normandy succeeded partly because planners learned from Tarawa's mistakes. But Normandy got the glory, while Tarawa faded from memory. A Tarawa veteran, speaking at a reunion in 1990, said, "We did D-Day 7 months before Normandy. We proved it could be done. We paid the tuition so they could learn, and America forgot us." The remains recovery efforts, continuing into the 21st century, keep Tarawa's memory alive in unexpected ways. The Defense POWW MIA Accounting Agency conducts periodic excavations on Betio, searching for Marines whose bodies were never recovered. In 2017, excavations recovered remains of 36 Marines. DNA identification returned them to families who thought they'd never have closure. The recovery missions make news briefly, reminding America that Tarawa's dead are still coming home 75 years later. 527 Marines remain missing from Tarawa as of 2023. Bodies lost in the lagoon or buried in unmarked graves or scattered across the island's coral. The historical reassessment of Tarawa has evolved through generations. Immediate post-war histories criticize the operation as wasteful and poorly planned. 1950s, historians began acknowledging strategic necessity. 1970s and 80s, scholarship emphasized lessons learned and casualties prevented. 21st century analyses present Tarawa as complex, simultaneously a planning failure and a necessary learning experience, both wasteful and essential, both tragic and transformative. The truth resists simplification. Tarawa was all of these things. The lasting impact on amphibious warfare doctrine is Tarawa's clearest legacy. Every modern amphibious assault, from Incheon in Korea to Gulf War beach operations, uses techniques developed in response to Tarawa's failures. Extended pre-landing bombardment, amphibious armor, underwater demolition, forward air control, dedicated medical evacuation, beach organization. All standard doctrine now, all developed because Tarawa revealed their necessity. The Marine Corps' warfighting publication on amphibious operations cites Tarawa in its historical annex as the foundational battle that shaped modern doctrine. Every Marine officer studies Tarawa at basic school, learning what went wrong and how to prevent repetition. The veterans are nearly gone now. The youngest Tarawa Marine, 18 years old at the battle, would be 98 years old in 2023. Most died in the 1990s and 2000s, taking their memories with them. The last major Tarawa reunion happened in 2003, 60 years after the battle, attended by 43 veterans. They were old men then, struggling with walkers and wheelchairs, gathering one final time to remember friends who died young. They told stories to younger generations, trying to pass on memories before the memories died with them. A veteran, speaking to his grandson, said, "When we're all gone, don't let them forget. Don't let Tarawa disappear. Those boys deserve better than to be forgotten." Modern Betio Island shows few signs of the battle. The population is now over 15,000, crowded onto the tiny island, building homes over former battlegrounds. Some Japanese bunkers have been incorporated into houses and shops. The reef is used by fishermen who know nothing of the Marines who died there. A small memorial stands near the airfield, rarely visited, poorly maintained. Occasionally tourists come, history buffs seeking the battle site, but they're rare. Tarawa belongs more to history books than to living memory now, more to veterans' descendants than to general consciousness. The island that cost so much is mostly forgotten by the world that benefited from the sacrifice. The final accounting of Tarawa's place in history acknowledges its paradox. It was both the worst and most important amphibious assault in American history. Worst because of the casualty rate, the planning failures, the preventable deaths. Most important because it taught lessons that made victory in the Pacific possible. Without Tarawa, the Central Pacific Offensive might have faltered. Without Tarawa's lessons, subsequent operations might have been even bloodier. Without Tarawa's sacrifice, the path to Tokyo Bay might have been impossible. This doesn't make Tarawa's cost acceptable, but it makes it comprehensible. The veterans who survived Tarawa insisted until the end that their sacrifice meant something. They didn't die for nothing, they said. They didn't suffer for a meaningless island. They bought lessons that saved their brothers in battles yet to come. They proved that American forces could crack Japan's fortress strategy. They showed that amphibious warfare against fortified positions was possible. Difficult, but possible. Survivable with the right tactics and equipment. This was their legacy, they said. Remember us not as victims of bad planning, but as teachers who paid for lessons in blood. Remember that we went first, we made the mistakes, we died so others wouldn't have to. Remember Tarawa not as a failure, but as a terrible, necessary step on the road to victory. And so, Tarawa stands in history. The first and the worst, the bloodiest and most educational, the most forgotten major battle of the Pacific War. 76 hours that changed amphibious warfare forever. 76 hours purchased with 1,027 American lives and nearly 5,000 Japanese lives. 76 hours on a coral atoll smaller than Central Park. 76 hours that most Americans have never heard of, but that shaped the path to victory in ways that can never be erased. Tarawa was terrible. Tarawa was necessary. Both statements are true, and the veterans who fought there, who died there, who survived to tell the story, deserve to be remembered for both.